All right, welcome to Abstract Particulars with Kenny, Josh, Karen, and myself, Rodrigo. This is part 10 of Truthmakers, and this will be different. We read we read we read two papers. One was Truth Without Truth-Making Entities by Jennifer Hornsby, which I pulled from, well, we found in the second anthology, from which we haven't read anything yet, by Helen Beebe. I forget what it's called. Let me look 1 second. Truthmakers. And then, which is basically a commentary on the paper we read, if not last week, then shortly before, by Rodriguez-Pereyra, otherwise known by Anglos as RP. And we read his postscript, Postscript to Why Truth Makers, he titles it, which is basically just a response to Hornsby, and also Dodd. We won't be talking about that. We'll just be talking about the first half where he responds to Hornsby's. So why is today different? Well, I guess the most immediate and obvious thing to say is that we all independently decided it would be important to have drinks while doing this commentary. And I poured mine right here. It's a lot of gin, actually, but I think I'm going to need it. Yeah, all I can say is I would not want to be in the same room as these two talking to each other. I don't think it would be a happy experience. Something is going on. Something is going on. I can feel it. And while they try to keep it philosophical, I'm not really sure if that's what it's about. But we'll pretend that it is and see how far we get. On the content, I think Hornsby is careful, but I'm not sure it's careful to the right purpose. And RP just responds. I mean, he just responds and tries to be done with it. Is kind of the feeling I get.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I'm mostly sympathetic to him, and he said, she said, which is, I suppose, a bias, but she makes some good points, and so it's I think it's worth talking about this somehow. I noticed also that Josh and I had a back and forth, which is before I read these. I started reading immediately afterwards, and I realized that we recapitulated kind of the same things.
On a lot of the, yes.
Yeah, I just want to make clear. I just want to be really explicit here. This is not a foursome, between RP, Hornsby, Josh, and myself. It's just them, and he and I don't, it's totally unrelated. Okay, so that's all I have to say. Josh, what did you think of this?
Kenny and I are just voyeuristic spectators. Awesome.
Well, it was amazing because after our Sunday conversation, I had a lot of thoughts, and so I was sharing them with Rodrigo on Slack, and then I read these papers. I was like, okay, this is like everything we were touching on. It's incredible. Okay, so first of all, I understood everything Pereyra said in his first article. I disagreed with a lot, and I understood a lot of his response to Hornsby. And with Jennifer Hornsby, I was not sure I was following her argument. I had the hardest time. Like I was missing something. I felt like she wasn't really representing what he was after correctly. And so when I read this response, I was very sympathetic to him because it just kind of seemed like Hornsby missed some of the emphasis. But to be fair to her, I was having a very hard time tracking her argument. It was a lot of conditionals and loop-de-loops, and if I'm interpreting him correctly, then this is the problem that he has, and if he responds with this, then he'll have to say that. And I wasn't sure that those were problems that he had, and he just says, I'm not saying that, so they're not problems that I had. And I was like, yeah, that's okay, that's what I thought. And he just kind of does quick work of her critique. And so I would like to think that maybe she has some points, and hoping maybe somebody can defend her a little bit better, but
I thought you were on her side.
Well, I'm not on his side. I'm just on his side and defending himself against her side. So yeah, this is tough. I'm a little. I don't have a lot to say except on the topic itself, but I don't feel like I really understood her enough. Otherwise, I'm just agreeing with him that she was arguing against a position that just wasn't his, or at least points that weren't crucial to his position. And so I kind of agree with him on his defense. So, but I'd like to think that she was going on about something important, and maybe he even missed her point. And so maybe I missed her point and he missed her point, and maybe I can gain something from maybe someone who got her point. I guess that's all I can say.
Kenny, did you catch any of these points that are being missed right and left? Swig.
Well, I can only describe my experience of reading this as if it was I was on a some sort of loop-de-loop of, oh, this is really interesting, this is a subtle thing, this is powerful, to wait, what is she saying here? To no, that's just definitely wrong. That's not even, I'm not sure that has to do with this problem. To no, I'm not sure what's going on. It's just like, oh, so I guess I suppose I want to say with Josh that I feel like she touched on some interesting and possibly significant things, but I'm not sure. But after reading the reply, RP's reply, I just I wasn't sure if they were talking to each other at all, or if it was more complicated. Well, I will say that this is one of the rare experiences I've had where as I was reading through it, I was thinking, man, this paper should probably be like 5 pages longer or something. Most of my experiences are like, this paper could have been like, said what it said in half the words. But this, I found myself wanting more about, this issue of revealing, what it is to be ontologically revealing. It was not clear to me why, she felt that like in that A through E section, I just I guess I just kind of disagreed with how she thought that was, going to be problematic for RP's argument. And there is a lot of subtlety. I mean, I thought the drawing out this issue of the asymmetry by comparison to other contexts in which there is a similar asymmetry, like she gives the by example. I thought that was brilliant and really fascinating and interesting. But requires more to be said, because it also sort of seems to indicate to me exactly the kind of context that people who are arguing in favor of grounding are looking for. So as where she seems to be thinking that somehow this is going to help her deflate the issue. So I don't know. It was, I guess as usual, the battle between nominalism and realism is really confusing. But yeah.
Karen, who were you more sympathetic to?
Well, it's interesting because I also was pretty much at a loss about this, the Hornsby article first read through, and I reread it again today. And I think I got a little bit more of a grasp of what her project is. I think it's probably important that she was responding to, I think she had read the finished product, but she was responding mostly to a conference presentation. So I'm not sure how much the response here is born out of that, whatever discussion happened. Probably in that room and then at the bar afterwards, and then maybe through various emails between people who attended. And I think she sets it out at the beginning of the paper. She says that, people who talk about truth makers sometimes have two different projects in mind. One is to kind of look at what is part of reality. And there you have intuition, strong intuitions about certain things being true. And then you say, well, if that's the case, then what does reality have to be like so that these things are true, right? So are there negative facts, for example? If I say, there are no unicorns, and I know that that's true, what is reality like? And then another project is just to understand truth itself, right? So what is the relationship of truth? What does it mean to make true? What kind of relationship is that? And as we've been looking at other types of quote unquote grounding, like how might it relate to the relationship between wholes and parts or something like that, right? Or, so how might this relationship work as a part of reality? And what she says is that Rodriguez-Pereyra kind of brings these two together. And I think that maybe that's true, that he shows that if we understand that making things true relationship, and how it compares to other things like, the connection between wholes and their parts, determinants and their determinables, then we might realize that we have commitments to what reality is like that come out just from understanding the making true relationship, right? So that's a way of doing the what's reality like, the ontology project, directly from looking at the relationship. Whereas you could be a theorist interested in truth makers that keeps those two projects relatively separate. Right, you're just, you believe that truth is connected to reality, and you believe certain things are true, like there are no unicorns. And then you're going to do your ontology. Well, what does it have to be? Do there have to be non-unicorns somewhere? Do there have to be possible worlds? Do there have to just be, a world that's free of unicorns? Like how much, what does reality have to be like to account for the fact that that's true, given that there's this relationship between truth and reality, whatever it is? Or you're studying the relationship, and you're trying to see how it compares to other relationships. But if you think in studying the relationship, you have these ontological commitments that fall out of it, which Rodriguez-Pereyra does think, right? Because the nature of grounding is a relationship between entities. So these things that are making true must always exist as entities, right? Now, as he says in his reply, that's not too much of a commitment, because it could be that, he doesn't take a stand on whether the entities that serve as truth makers are things like negative facts, right? He doesn't take a stand on whether that's, it could be a positive fact that accounts for the truth of a negative statement. He hasn't fought that out. He hasn't done that project yet. But I think Hornsby's right to show that this is, that this is an interesting way to go about it, to say just understanding the relationship, you get these ontological commitments to the existence of all these entities. And she's saying, well, do you need all these entities? Maybe you just need properties or state of affairs talk. And we know how controversial state of affairs talk is. Sometimes it's going to lead you to a belief in entities and sometimes not, right? So so there might be ways to, explain these things without positing entities. So, overall, I think Rodriguez-Pereyra is good at defending himself from her criticisms of his paper. But I don't know at the end of the day that I'm committed to thinking that, the roses being red, or, well, I'm pretty open to states of affairs being entities. So maybe, and I'm okay with entities coming quite cheaply, but, maybe there is a better way to understand what these ways are, or these states of affairs are, than sort of labeling them as entities in a two-place relationship with propositions.
Yeah, I very much like your charitable reading of Hornsby, and it is pretty much how I understood it as well. It's easy to get caught up in the back and forth between them and the energy of the piece, but as for its goals, or rather her goals, independently of speaking to his paper, I think you're right that it's largely about connecting those two projects, the ontological project and the truth-making. How would you describe the two projects? There's the truth project and the ontology project, roughly.
Right. Yeah. She says there's the questions: what exists in reality, or what is truth? Right?
There you go. Yeah. There's a truth versus.
But truth makers.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. Right. So I think she's definitely on the right track in criticizing somebody, if not RP on this particular occasion. But now I'm wondering, what was exactly the point of his original paper? Because I didn't review it for this occasion. I remember liking it, but I don't remember what the fine-grained thesis really was, other than to suggest very vaguely that perhaps something like states of affairs might have to enter in as entities. In
Very,
the
very
truth-maker
specifically,
relation.
that for the class of propositions that he's attacking or tackling, the truth makers must be entities. And then
Okay.
he also sets out a very specific challenge, which is that if you have any sort of truth making that relies on properties, what is that instantiation relationship without reifying the properties as entities? Because otherwise you're not finishing the job, or something like that. You're going to have to ultimately reify the proposition to account for how it is that some aspect of an entity makes true some proposition about the entity.
Right.
And that's the general
Right.
claim, and then challenge for anybody else, which of course he claims Hornsby hasn't even tackled.
Right. Yeah. Like
Which
if
she
you don't
doesn't have to,
somehow,
you know. I mean,
if you don't somehow make the orangeness of this piece of paper an entity separate from the squareness of this piece of paper, how are you going to account for that the orangeness isn't the squareness?
Right. How do
Right.
you integrate the properties? Yeah. Yeah. That's
yeah, no, that sounds right. I mean, the impression I got from the postscript and what I vaguely remember from the earlier paper was that he's just trying to draw out some consequences for the tasks that. Oh my God! Let me see that.
Nice.
Let me see that. Let me see that. Oh my God, you're ridiculous.
That
That's
is
great.
awesome.
Is that a grapefruit? Is that a grapefruit?
Wow.
no. It's a, what is this? Spaghetti squash carved out with, it's like a taco salad, but a really healthy version. It's amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wow.
Uh, thank you.
You're a very lucky man, Josh.
Yeah.
Just get
Yeah.
married
That
now,
way.
get it over with. Yeah.
Fresh avocado and cabbage. There's like feta on here. Oh, it's fresh guacamole salsa.
Right. So,
Had
so
you guys read anything by Hornsby before? This was the first thing I read by her.
I
swear-
vaguely
I swear we read
remember.
something else by her.
really?
Yeah.
I vaguely remember reading a Hornsby about part-whole relationships years ago, but I might be wrong.
Mm. I know that I set aside her book Simple-Mindedness, but I never got around to it.
Mm.
And I don't even know what it's about. Anyway, so I took his argument to be something like, there are good reasons for the truth-maker principle. It has consequences. Okay, metaphysicians, including myself, get to work. That's what I remember. And that's not something you can criticize on the basis of the work not yet done. And that's how he defends himself. He says, look, it could be this, it could be that. I'm just saying it has to be something. But on the other hand, I think Hornsby is right to insist that we make good on this promise.
Karen, was that your sense? Was that she is essentially attacking the spirit of his position, but not necessarily the arguments in the paper we read? And so he's defending himself by the details of the paper instead of maybe the spirit of the project that she's sort of attacking, like the implications of it or what you'll have to say, or
Right. Well, I mean, I think she does raise some interesting questions, right? So so I think that there were some necessary clarifications that he gives, but I think he's right that he doesn't actually make the commitments that she thinks he makes, such that she could criticize him in the way that she does. But I also think she does raise interesting questions about the paper that he responds to, and particularly about the worry about nested truth makers, right? So if you think that, we got Boris in the mat again, right? Very useful to have him on the desk at all times. If Borison makes the proposition Boris is on the mat true, Boris and the mat together, right? And some relationship being on or whatever, some state of affairs, whatever it is that makes that sentence true. But then you can talk about the state of affairs that is the sentence being true, because look, it's not true anymore. So it was true for about a minute and now it's not true anymore, but now it's true again. So you can talk about the state of affairs of its being true, right? So then the question is the state of affairs of its being true the same thing as the state of affairs is this, right? The truth maker of Boris is on the mat. Or is it something else? Because now it includes something called a proposition. And we're very clear in truth maker theory, at least if we're RP, that reality isn't propositions, right? Because propositions are independent and they have to be made true by reality because there's that asymmetry, right? So then if this isn't the proposition Boris is on the mat, then we say something like Boris is on the mat was true for a minute and a half, but isn't true anymore, right? Then we're talking about something else. So what's the truth maker for the sentence Boris is on the mat was true for a minute and a half, right? So what's the truth maker for sentences about the truth of propositions? And then what about sentences about the truth of sentences that are about the truth of propositions, right? So it's true that the sentence that Boris is on the mat is true. Or it's true that it's true that the sentence that Boris is on the mat is true. Now, if all of those need truth makers, and all truth makers have to be entities and parts of reality, we have this proliferation of entities all of a sudden, right? But if we don't, so I think what he says is that it's always going to be this chunk of reality that's making all of those true, right? This state of affairs, even though they nest. This somehow is going to be the thing that works as the truth maker for that. Now, she seems to think that story makes the whole thing symmetrical rather than asymmetric, and I haven't sort of thought that through yet. Right? That's her response. Like if you make the truth maker for the proposition that Boris is on the mat is true, then it's a symmetrical relationship because, when you go back to Boris is on the mat is true because Boris is on the mat, you put, the truth maker, you had the same truth maker on both sides. So I thought that was an interesting question, but I think I like his response.
She says that that RP has two main arguments for the conclusion that truth is grounded in entities. One argument he gives goes through the reification of how things are, and the other argument goes through it goes from the idea that truth is grounded and that grounding is a relation, and that relations relate entities or whatever, to the conclusion that truth is grounded in entities. So he has these two different routes. One, which is more focused ontologically in a sense, because it's about how things are. And the other, which is, I guess you might say, more strictly logical in a sense, in the sense that it seems to be, or at least Hornsby reads it as sort of like an argument via an explication of what it is to say that truth is grounded. I mean, that's, so I mean, the structure, is that she goes through all of these different formulations of the grounding principle of what it means to say that truth is grounded. She gives, 4 different formulations, which she's extracted from RP's paper, and then all of which are supposed to be approximately equivalent or something like that. And she basically just tries to go through all of them and show how maybe they're subtly fall into 2 different groups. So they're really maybe not quite so much exactly the same. And then for each of those 2 groups, she tries to make a different kind of argument as to why it's not clear that in general, the argument goes through that there must be truth-making entities. So I suppose we should go through the 4 formulations, just because they're gonna come up over and over.
Right.
So these are G1 through, yeah.
Yeah,
No,
and I think that's worth doing, but it reminded me of another thing that she says is a tension in his paper, in that
Hmm.
he seems to want to restrict his claims to just a limited kind of propositions, right? Because his argument is more intuitive that way. If it's, you know, a certain
it's the
class of
synthetic
synthetic, right,
propositions. Yeah.
But presumably his truth about, you know, his argument about grounding applies quite generally, right? So that means it would seem to imply that there are and truth-making entities for things like, you know, logical truths and all that stuff. So even though he restricts himself in setting out his argument, he doesn't, and maybe
Right,
it's
and
just
this is
he didn't want to make the language awkward of always repeating that, you know, that clarification. But yeah, that's
so
one of
this
the
is this is
criticisms.
why she makes the distinction separating the four formulations into two groups, because one of them she thinks of as being the more appropriate formulation for the argument via the, you know, reification of entities, or of you know, positing how things are, you know, or ways things, you know, are as entities, whereas the other formulation is more general in a sense, and seems to be more appropriate to the second argument, which has to do, you know, in some sense, just with the nature of truth itself, right? And so there's this, you know, continuing thread of those two questions that she sees as essentially being you know, addressed by these two different lines of argument to the same conclusion, but I mean, you know, look, the conclusion that's reached, right, is truth is grounded in entities. So that's the statement that she names Aunt G. I mean, the first thing to notice about this is that that statement has both truth in it and it has entities in it. And there's a sense in which the two different lines of argument that she goes through, that he gives, each focus on one, you know, on either the left-hand side or the right-hand side of that grounding relation, in order to, you know, to find some way into it. Yeah, so she separates out the formulations, the four formulations, because she thinks that you know, they're not quite all the same in this regard.
Right.
RP disowns making much of the four different formulations. He offers them as just I mean, the tone of the challenge is just completely off. I mean, he's just throwing language around in order to earn an audience, you know, so to speak to people who might speak in different ways, and she's taking these to be somehow theses to be analyzed in their wording. I mean, it's just, I find it very inappropriate.
Right.
But yeah, let's look at the wordings and see what we can discover in them, since at least someone might speak in this way.
Yeah, I think RP is saying that, he's trying to basically say, this is all support for what'll be my first premise, which is truth is grounded. So all I really want to argue for here is some sort of asymmetry and a relationship of dependence. Yeah. Right. So all of these are different ways of pointing to a relationship of dependence that's asymmetrical. And so that's all I'm trying to do, you know, and I'm not trying not to buy into any more commitments than that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If I had to try to encapsulate it tightly, maybe I would say that the failure to meet of the two papers is sort of because Hornsby sort of sees these theses as statements to be explicated and analyzed, whereas RP is seeing them as playing a role if I'm reading him correctly, is sort of in an inference to the best explanation. I mean, these things all seem to be true. They point out a dependency and an asymmetry, and the most reasonable explanation is that truth is grounded, right?
Right.
Of this phenomena, right? The most and
Right, because it's the relationship du jour that, or the connection du jour, if we don't want to commit to it being a relationship, that gives you asymmetric dependence, right?
yeah.
Right. Yeah. So.
It's worth pointing out that Karen and Josh have been expressing some skepticism as to whether there really is such a relation, or at least a unified. And
Right.
what are the two characteristics that we're not so sure of? Unity and
yeah, that there's a single relation that's going to capture things like the relationship between parts and wholes and truth making.
Oh, you mean big G grounding versus the little G
Yeah.
grounding issue
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
whether there's a single
From
whether there's a
Wilson.
relation that has unity and priority.
Yeah.
Whether that has priority and is unified with the other supposed
Yeah.
relations.
Yeah, that can capture the priority and the asymmetry that we want, and in a way that shows it's unified with all the other relationships that we're trying to lump together.
And insofar as very many of them suggesting a candidate way of unifying them employ what look like part-whole relations, the truth maker relation in particular seems not to be a part-whole relation.
Right, it seems a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, if nothing,
Right, but that doesn't mean that it isn't.
If nothing else,
But it doesn't mean that it
proposition
isn't
abstract.
some other relation, right? I mean,
Yeah, but then you don't have unity.
Oh, right. No, it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah. So do we need a story about it akin to one of the little G grounding stories, you know, or is it,
But I mean,
is it
once you go down
basically just,
once you go to that road, you've already sort of given up this notion of big G grounding, right? If you now
Yeah.
say that truth making is this kind of relation, and well, this other part whole metaphysical determining constitution is another relation. I mean, you've already given up big G grounding as an
Yeah.
analysis of this idiom of in virtue of. So, I mean, that's already giving up too much.
Right.
It's worth saying
Yeah.
that
yeah,
every one of these G's, right, G1, 2, 3, and 4, is a grounding idiom, to use Wilson's phrase, right? She speaks of idioms, right, being unified. There's dependence, the because as metaphysical causation, determined versus determinable, explanation being related to determination, and of course the in virtue of. So, and then on the right-hand side, there's a proposition, there's reality, there's aspects of reality, and then there's nominalizations of propositions standing in for portions of reality. The full gamut of what needs to be unified are in G1 through G4. So even if, even though it wasn't her purpose to say that that these don't all come together, it is reminiscent of what we've been reading and thinking about in reading Wilson, in that she's claiming they don't all come together, or at least not.
For the
obviously
record,
so.
I promised myself not to bring up Wilson. I did it.
It's unavoidable. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
I think
I wasn't going to
it will
fault you with that.
and
I think it will
And
be
I-
unavoidable, especially as we get on in the later part of this paper. I think
yeah.
I certainly
And-
thought about it.
And as much as I relish being on Josh's side on all our debates, I'm not sure that I think, I mean, actually, I think Josh kind of inspired me when he said that, you know, big G grounding is just like a big indication of future work, because I thought, yeah, big C causation is often that too. So big G grounding just might be, look, you've got an account here where you have to explain things like an asymmetric dependence. And so you're going to have to talk about things like, you know, certain kinds of counterfactual dependencies, or, you know, explain why there is this dependence, why it's one way. And you have to do that work, which will lead you to some sort of little grounding. But it's probably a little grounding plus other things, right? Because one of the things that Wilson says is a lot of the little grounding relationships that we've been given so far fail to account for asymmetries, right? And things like that. So it is nice that in this paper, I mean, Hornsby says, well, look, there's an asymmetry and we need an account for it. So here's my version, right? So it does seem
even though
that there's a
this,
sort of general respect to this grounding relationship as asymmetric dependence between entities. That goes beyond where I think Hornsby puts it this way, when you replace if and only if with a because, it shows you that because isn't if and only if, right? Like there's more, you can't reduce your becauses to your if and only ifs. And I think that's true. And so there might be an if and only if for a relationship, but that's not telling you everything you need to know about the relationship in question.
is this a good time to introduce the nominalization idea?
Yeah, or do we want to go through the four? Kenny, did you have thoughts on the four different?
Yeah, actually, let's do that first.
Right. So the four different ones, they fall into the two different categories, right? G1 and G2. Well, let me just read G1 and G2. So G1 is the proposition the rose is red is true because the rose is red. That's G1. And G2 is the truth of the proposition the rose is red is explained by or determined by the roses being red. So these two formulations have the truth of a proposition on one side, and on the other side have have something which either expresses or names something like a proposition or a state of affairs. Where the first one is all is straight sentences. There's a sentence on either side of the because, and in the second one there is a sentence. There is the fact of the truth of some proposition that's being explained by some other fact or state of affairs or something. And these ones are going to say, she's going to say are going to fall into the line of argument that he gives by way of his realism about properties or how things are. And then the G3 and G4 are the truth of the proposition the rose is red depends on what reality is like. And then the G4 is that the proposition the rose is red is true in virtue of or because of reality. So the difference with these ones is that what's on the right-hand side is something far more general. It doesn't specify, in any way, what exactly it is, in virtue of which thing on the left-hand side is true. And and because of that, she thinks these two are the ones that are better suited for an understanding of the line of argument that goes via what she takes to be an explication of truth, because they do seem to just be statements that are capturing something basic about the idea of truth, in a most general manner.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in a way, in G3 and G4, the proposition that's mentioned is almost irrelevant. I mean, you could just say truth depends on what reality is like. Truths are true in virtue of reality, and the significance of that will come out when she later gives her generalizations, her schemas, her schematic reformulations of these statements.
Right. So he's on.
Because G1 and G2 both denote, and so there's available this move of specifying entities, right? But oddly, to me, G3 and G4 seem to capture this in virtue of relation better. And so when I was reading that, I was thinking, okay, yeah, I get this, but actually these seem to capture the spirit of this relation, and it's this move to G1 or G2, or maybe specifically to G2, which is the version of truth making that I'm most troubled by, because it just doesn't seem all that explanatory. And it seems very open to like a deflationary account or a this nominalization that she's going to bring in here. But there's something that about G3 and G4 that they keep that at bay. There's almost like a purity to truth in that sense. It sort of preserves truth in the underspecification, in the lack of denoting. There's like this preservation of truth. Oddly enough, I mean, that was just my intuition. Like when you say too much, you almost open yourself up to some deflationary account of truth. But in G3 and G4, you can't do that. It's reality that determines it. But when you say more than that, this is when you get all the difficulties. I don't know what else to say beyond that, but that's just kind of hanging over my head after reading this.
I had the same feeling. I thought 3 and 4 were steering clear of having the right-hand side paraphrasable as a proposition.
Right.
It's the explicit
Exactly.
reference to reality. I thought that G3's reference to what reality is like and G4's reference to reality were interchangeable. We could just as well have added 5 and 6, where 5 would be the truth of the rose is red depends on reality, and G6 would be the rose is red, or rather the proposition that the rose is red. The proposition the rose is red is true in virtue of what reality is like. You see what I'm saying? So I assume she was just lifting these from his text, but my point
Except
is
that
that
G3
there's no obvious connection between the left and the right on G3 and G4.
Yeah, exactly. Except with G3, there seems to be an opening for like a Cyrillian mode of presentation. Like reality might be like something from a certain perspective. And there might be something about that likeness that determines the truthfulness of propositions. So there might be an
Cyrillian?
oh, like John Searle, where he presents his
Cyrillian.
modes of presentation for truth.
I thought I needed to know the Cyrillic alphabet.
It's cool. Cool to say
No, I
Cyrillian.
think that what reality is like is just his invitation to considerations of states of affairs or possibly tropes, whereas the of reality is not so much an alternative as a more neutral presentation.
Yeah, exactly. That's fine. But like,
or maybe he's right.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say maybe he's right that when he's saying all of these things, he's just pointing to an asymmetric dependence, in which case he's just saying which way it goes in these sentences, right?
In other words, there are all just
like,
different ways of saying it's asymmetric.
Right. Well, he's saying because, the truth of the rose is red depends on reality, not vice versa. So there's an asymmetry here. And it's a dependence, right? The truth of proposition depends on reality and not vice versa. It's not like propositions have this magical ability to make reality what it is. So
The disagreement.
All of this is about premise 1, that truth is grounded because there's an asymmetric dependence there.
And he says as much.
Then you can see how that,
The disagreement.
Says as much.
The disagreement between these two philosophers is really kind of fascinating because I think it sort of shows that even though they're both analytic philosophers, I think they're coming from different sort of sub-traditions. So I don't know much about Hornsby, but she's older than RP, and I do know that she is a kind of a Davidsonian philosopher of action, among other things. And she actually brings up a Davidsonian argument, in a footnote, which actually I found was one of the most interesting parts of the paper. But it was really powerful. It had to do with her analysis of the asymmetry of the because phrasing. But it feels to me that she's, coming from this, sort of older, philosophy of language tradition, whereas RP feels like he's doing a more straightforward type of, more modern metaphysics. And so they're just kind of like not quite, arguing in the same manner about these same propositions. It's really fascinating.
I think you're absolutely right. The simple-mindedness book that I mentioned, I vaguely remember that it is anti-realistic. That is, it takes Davidson as a starting position and then tries to, I don't remember exactly, but it says something about attributions of intentions and the like. steering clear of metaphysical um, commitments even more assiduously than Davidson himself on the basis of ordinary language arguments, basically. And you're right, this is very much a, let's say, scientific come metaphysical realist subtradition versus an ordinary language pragmatist tradition. Both analytic, but not very friendly to each other. And
It's fascinating.
yeah, and I wonder to what extent their clashing is really a methodological, temperamental. I mean, of course, they're trying to do it, their face off in terms of arguments, but I wonder if that's even useful.
Oh, there's a huge rift there. I mean, there's this in his response at the bottom of section 1. He talks about intuitions only teaching us about ourselves, nothing
Yeah,
about
right.
the world.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
that I was just like, oh, it's on
I
now.
know, he was just
I
like, he
know.
was just putting the knife in. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
I'm
So,
telling you, I would not want to be in that room.
no, I mean that's a huge methodological difference. I mean, no insights from linguistic analysis, no insights from conceptual analysis. Like that's
Right.
that's intense. That's
I
intense.
mean,
Yeah.
it's not, I don't even take it that literally. I mean, of course he's going to take insights from what we say, as long as it's not some kind of survey. He's going to take insights from what he says, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's his thoughts, right? It's just not going to be definitive. I think that's the methodological point. And I'm not so sure that she would disagree with that, which is my point. It's like, I think that if they were to have a metaphilosophical discussion, they might disagree somewhere, but not to any effect, not to the effect of resolving any differences here. And yet the fact that those comments come up are indirectly an indication of directions taken differently with respect to the arguments. I don't know.
I mean, he just straight up says, I reject this method. So, I mean,
No, I can hear that. I mean, yeah, literally it's true. I mean, she is employing a method that he rejects, but it's just
Right.
not clear that it couldn't be paraphrased or reframed to be a method that he does approve of. I'm just not convinced. I guess maybe I'm just having a difficulty coming to terms with this particular opposition, because I feel like I'm on both sides.
Yeah.
I like both methodologies, and I don't think they're really that opposed, even though I recognize they are distinct traditions.
I mean, this is a topic that still hurts my heart since we read, I think, Beeler on intuition, and then some follow-ups where people just essentially besmirch conceptual analysis. And since then, I've been very unsure what philosophers are doing, if they're against any sort of linguistic or conceptual analysis. I just wonder if they're sort of implicitly contradicting themselves, or if they have some other method that I'm just not that familiar with. I don't quite understand those who make these claims, but then continue to do philosophy. But I want to.
I mean, to be sure, I think Beeler moves it forward. Like this opposition that you see between these two is probably an opposition that stood, that was manifest for decades before Beeler, and then since Beeler. You know, I'm actually guessing when he published that. Was that like 80s or 90s? It wasn't earlier, was it?
Do you remember what the name of the paper was? I don't think I read it.
It's worth reading. It's really good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'll look it up in a moment.
Sure.
Anyway, after that, more recently, I think like not more than 20 years ago, is Frank Jackson's defense of conceptual analysis, which I think is an effort to carve, to find a middle ground between these two temperaments, which is why I don't really want to admit that they're directly opposing one another. When he's rejecting, right? What he's really saying is, look, I'll take my intuitions from the people that I like, you know. So that's how I read it.
Yeah, intuition and the autonomy of philosophy.
Oh, wow.
Do you have the date on that?
It is a beast. It looks like it is not written down. There are a lot of citations from 96. So
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. It's very recent.
98.
98, okay.
Yeah. Wow. All right, cool.
Yeah, I mean, what is I mean, even from like a Putnam, you know, externalist, setting aside intuitions, I mean,
Hmm.
concepts aren't necessarily depending on intuitions. Certainly the content of concepts, if, they're determined by the world, like they would be quite informative with some sort of conceptual analysis. Or is it that because that's a causal relation, there's not much we can glean from that in terms of metaphysical dependence? This is a methodological point that he's rejecting. So I'm just wondering if, in general, how does an externalist reject any sort of conceptual analysis? I guess it's not fair to say any sort. Just typically, just here, he's speaking about intuitions. But if intuitions are in any way constituted of concepts, how does an externalist get away from that? Does that make sense?
You mean, are you asking how does an externalist like go on doing philosophy while giving up on conceptual analysis, or do you think, or is it that
Yes.
they need to not give up on it but find some way of understanding it given their new understanding of concepts?
Well, that's my position, yes. But how is it that they go on having rejected conceptual analysis?
Well, I feel like the people who go on to reject it, I mean, I'm not sure. I feel like they probably fall into various camps, but the people who reject it most strongly are people like the Churchlands, right?
Right. Yeah.
Who don't think, they think you're not going to learn anything. They think, you should just go to the neuroscience conference. Like, don't bother with the philosophy conference, really. I mean, that's mostly what they do.
I think the other less scientific, but still naturalistic and externalist philosophers, I don't know about RP, but others would be similar, although maybe not go so far as to say don't listen to the philosophers, but rather would consider the work of the philosophers to draw out the consequences of what the natural sciences produce. So you're not relying on intuitions, but you are adding argument. You are proceeding by way of argumentation from what science delivers and what common sense delivers to reach new conclusions that were otherwise missed. And I think
this
is this way.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and this is the very naturalistic approach. For example, Tim Maudlin is definitely an externalist. He has this book called The Metaphysics Within Physics. And all he does is...
We're reading from that this Sunday. Did you know?
Yeah.
You picked it. What am I talking about?
Yeah, I picked it. We should read more from it. In particular, there's one essay that I want to read where what he does is he actually goes through gauge theory and then he pulls the metaphysics out of it.
Gauge theory? Wow. Maybe that'll help me understand Eric.
It's nuts. I mean, he's deep in it though, but the other stuff is simpler. But although actually in the paper we're going to read, he does go through some of the how quantum mechanics refutes Humean supervenience.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. So start reading soon.
I have to brush up on my quantum.
Yeah, they look like, I was looking through the paper. It looks like there's some sections where I'm going to be like, woo.
There are some equations later.
There's a lot of equations that go on for pages. Not a lot, but there are some equations that go on for pages.
Sean Carroll assured me that the core theory's equations only fit on one page.
That's right.
Did he say how big that page was?
It's just a very long page.
It's a very long page.
It's just a scroll. It's one page, but it's papyrus.
Scroll. So. Get on it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, where are we?
All right. Oh my gosh, I'd never seen this symbol at the bottom of 35.
Yeah, what was that?
I had just never seen that symbol in my life. I mean, I feel like at this point I've read a lot of philosophy and like logic and math, and I've never seen that symbol.
I blocked it out. I thought it was just blurry.
It was just blurry.
There's no footnote.
Yeah, no. So that symbol is supposed to read as is approximately equivalent to.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Wow. I'm gonna write that down.
Yeah. So I had to read this section a couple of times to get that clear. But yeah, so that's what that symbol means.
Well, it looks like a blurry cross, so I guess it's appropriate.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because it's like the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost are approximately equivalent to each other.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Karen. I didn't even have to explain
Catholicism
it.
makes a lot of sense now. Yeah.
It's a mystery. You've understood all you have to understand.
Oh, that's pretty good.
All right.
All right. All right.
I mean, he is from the nation that gave us Pope Francis. So, yeah.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, but the symbol is in the Hornsby, so I don't think
Maybe
it appeared in.
Maybe she got it from him. Maybe.
Yeah.
Could have been one of his
Who knows?
slides at the conference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Exactly. So the nominalization thing, can I just say?
Yeah, go ahead.
I found it really annoying.
Yeah.
Deeply annoying. Well, first of all, because he doesn't do it, right? So her putting words in his mouth just goes nowhere. But also because it undermines the whole point of the insight of truthmaker theory, which is to get away from facts and propositions as ground. She seems to be doing actually what Horwich was doing.
Yeah, I also couldn't help but think of the Horwich paper when reading this. I didn't have time to go back and skim it. I meant to, but
it's very simple. He just said propositions are made true by other propositions.
Right, but no, but he also essentially draws attention to the distinction between these two questions that she starts the paper with. The question about, what's entities there are, and what is truth, or how can we give a theory of truth? He was also pulling on that for some reason, and he's also seemingly some sort of nominalist. So yeah, it did seem to be in line.
Because they want to solve one project without the other. That's why.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I guess that is the idea. The idea is to pull apart those questions and say you can solve one without the other, and then just forget the other question. Basically, right? Something like that.
Because as nominalists, they think there's pointless. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she's a nominalist, but I think we're
no. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think Horwich, probably is. Yeah, honestly, I didn't find that terribly helpful, this AE thing. And honestly, it didn't seem to really do much work in the paper. I mean, it just kind of like.
Oh, speaking of doing work, I found another justification for Wilson's title. No work for a theory of grounding. Could it be?
Lewis.
Lewis's, yeah.
It is, yes.
New work for a theory of universals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
New work and no work. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so we have to read that because I haven't read that yet.
We do, yeah. I haven't read it either, and it's supposed to be very, very good and very influential, actually. So,
yeah.
Okay, so in 1-2, she brings up. Well, she brings up.
It's that 1-2 is that nested.
Well, there are two issues. Basically, she says when you look at these four formulations, you have to ask yourself. First, she wants to focus on G1 and G2, which are the denoting ones, the ones that contain denoting phrases. And she says we have to ask ourselves, do they denote the same thing or different things? And she explores each alternative. She says, the first alternative is that they're different. I mean, and that seems intuitive enough because one of them is something like the fact of a proposition's being true. And then the other thing seems to be the truth maker for that proposition, right? And her criticism of that, of going that way, is that you get this. She says, one then appears to be committed to an unending hierarchy of truth makers in respect of each proposition. The truth of proposition P, truth of the proposition P is true. And then she nests and it goes on nesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so on, and so on, ad infinitum, right? Where you just keep nesting, is true, of the, encapsulating the previous proposition. And then she just kind of says, that's the objection. And, I thought, well, but isn't it already, I'm not even sure nominalists have problems with this line, because there's the language, there's the meta language, there's the meta language. I'm not really sure. It wasn't really clear to me what the substance of this particular objection was supposed to be. Like why,
Yeah.
and in fact, in his paper, in the response, he was like, well, yeah, that is the way it is.
I found it.
Oh no, I think in his
I
response, in his response, he wants to say that there's one entity can be the truth maker for all those things, even if they're
That's right.
Right. So he doesn't think there's a proliferation of entities. I think because he believes ways, like the roses being red, the rose's redness is different from the rose's lightness, that entities are abundant in his metaphysics, right? There's no shortage of them. There's a great proliferation. So, but I think he wants to say that he doesn't want entities proliferating in this matter, such that there's endless, and anytime you have a true proposition, there's an endless creation of entities, which are propositions about the truth of that proposition, and propositions about the propositions about the truth of that proposition, and the propositions about the propositions about the propositions about the truth of that proposition. And then all of those have to be entities, because all of those seem to be grounded in the one next to them. Right. So if grounding requires a relationship, and the truth of P is the ground for the truth of it is true that P, then if it is true that it is true that is P is grounded on it is true that P rather than on P itself, then that's grounding. So both of those have to be entities. They both have to be states of affairs or something, or ways, right? And if the one here is then grounded, and then if you go say, well, the truth of the truth of P, and that has to be made true by the thing next to it, then again, they must both be entities. Right. So you do have that proliferation of infinite entities created as, ways of accounting for talk of the propositions that are there next to. And he wants to say, no, all you need is the P, the truth maker for P, and it can work as the truth maker for all of those things. And one of these is a very, very important point that he says, my truth makers don't have to, match the structure of the proposition that they make true, right? Or don't have to match the so it could be, under my account, he says, I haven't taken a stand in this yet, that it's the roses being red that makes the rose is not blue true. But there's no blueness in the roses being red, right? But it makes a proposition that mentions blueness true. So there can be that disconnect, right? So it could be that, you have way out the end of the chain, you have, the proposition that it is true that the proposition that it is true that the proposition that it is true that P, right? And there's a lot of, but really what makes that true is P, and all this other stuff is not part of its truth making. Okay. It's not related. All that other structure that's in the big long proposition that has true written in it 12 times. That's not what's the truth maker for it.
Okay, but hold on. When I read this, I thought she was absolutely wrong. Like, she misunderstood his point. And then I read his reply, and he was like, no, it's the truth maker for P that makes all of these nesting propositions true. But then in reading his response, I thought maybe she was actually right, because he does say for every the class of synthetic propositions, they have entities as truth makers. Well,
right.
these are actual synthetic propositions. It is true that P, it is true that it is true that it is P. And so it
Right.
seems,
Yeah, but
so,
he doesn't. But they don't necessarily. He doesn't say they have to have unique ones, right? They're all part of that
Yeah.
same class. But
Right,
the
but
class
then-
of their truth makers may not be, one-to-one. Well, I mean, if it's infinite, it could be one-to-one anyways. But it.
I think he could have done better. He could have just admitted that they all have distinct truth makers.
Exactly.
But since grounding is transitive, that the ultimate grounding
Right.
of them would
Well,
be P.
yeah, right. There's that too, right? That actually seemed the more natural. I mean, that was what I was thinking.
So that's what I mean. I wish he would have said something more about that, but he's already using a notion of
Well-
entailment. So I don't know why it can't be that P entails the truth of it's true that P, right? And then like I don't know why he wouldn't make that move if it's just
But the
entailment.
transitivity doesn't depend on entailment. It's just like the proposition that the rose is red is made true by the. Well, let's just go with the states of affairs reading. So the redness of the rose makes that proposition true. Now, the proposition that the rose is red is true, that's not made true by the redness of the roses being red. It's made true by the propositions the rose is red's being true. Okay. But since it's a grounding relation and grounding is transitive, then that itself is grounded by the roses being red.
Though for RP in his response, he says, no, it's grounded by the state of affairs of the rose being red. Yeah.
What he says isn't.
You're saying he doesn't
what I'm
have to.
saying. What he says
Right,
isn't
okay.
what I'm saying, but what he says, if you allow grounding to be ultimate grounding, is consistent with what I'm saying. I'm just saying he could have helped himself to that and
Right.
I mean,
But I think-
would have.
But if I were
Well,
him and
well,
if I were in his position, I would be just as annoyed and I'd want to not give anything as well.
Well, yeah, he doesn't want to say he's forced to recognize all these entities, right? Because he's got enough entities on his hands as it is.
I mean, it's not like there's
and
a
I think
shortage
that's
of
true.
entities.
Wait, hold on. No, wait. He couldn't have said it's
Well,
transitive
because-
that way that Rodrigo you're proposing, because it would then
Why
mean
not?
that the proposition that that P is also a truth maker for it is true that P.
No. That's not what I said. It's not the proposition that the rose is red that is the truth maker for it is true that the rose is red, but rather, let's label these, right? So let's say R1 is the proposition the rose is red, and R2 is it is true that R1 is true. Okay. Oh no, R1 is true. R2 is R1 is true, and R3 is R2 is true, right? So what the truth maker for R2 is R1's being true. R1's being true is not a proposition. It's the truth maker for R2. And R1's being true is in turn grounded, not made true, but grounded by the truth maker for R1.
Right. But so I think what his response is something like, look, if you think about this proposition, it is true that the proposition the rose is blue is false. Now, what could be the truth maker for that might be a red rose, right? A state of affairs of a rose being red. So now we say, consider the proposition. It is true that the proposition the rose is red is true. The truth maker for that might just be a red rose.
Yeah, I know that's what he
Yes,
says.
there's talk about a proposition, there's nesting, but it doesn't change the fact that the truth maker isn't two entities now. The proposition and
Exactly.
through transitivity arose the state of
Exactly.
affairs that is a red rose. It's still the red rose.
Yeah.
Ultimately, yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
he just doesn't think that. Yeah, he thinks that they sort of collapse through, and that there
Yeah,
doesn't
I'm
need to
just
be a
suggesting he
truth
could
maker.
have-
That yeah,
He could have helped himself to more entities and it wouldn't have hurt his point. That's all.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it really bothered me that she didn't go on to say more, an objection to that, because I mean, it's not clear to me why plenty of people wouldn't happily endorse that. I mean, it's not really clear to me what she thinks is problematic about it.
I think there's an absence here of a whole discussion on what gravitas the word entities is supposed to have. Are we supposed to be troubled if, I mean, I
No, I know what it is.
certainly
But
wouldn't
you have
want-
to identify.
I-
You have to say what
how's it
they
different from
are.
objects? right?
No, that's
How
not-
is it different from entity? Is
no.
entity a catch-all that includes both objects and states of affairs and
Yes.
properties, or
Yes.
if entities is really broad, then are thoughts all entities? Are parts of thoughts
Yes.
entities? So then if we basically just say that, because it seems to me that there's going to be a big fight, right, that she points to, and that RP says, well, I haven't taken a side in this fight yet, of whether or not there are entities like negative facts or, disjunctive states of affairs, right? So it seems like not everything gets in, right? So we might be hesitant sometimes to call things entities, or just allow in another infinite number of them.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think.
And so,
I don't think
I
the
think there
problem
needs to
is-
be a discussion about why we might hesitate to deny entity status to something.
I don't think the problem is whether something is or isn't an entity. It's just entity is just, I mean, at least on my reading of metaphysics, I have no idea what she's reading or what RP is reading, but I've seen the word entity used as the most generic category of anything that may be said to exist, to be especially inclusive not only of particulars, but also things like properties and relations.
Right, but yes,
But
but
her
we,
complaint,
okay, go on.
her specific complaint is that if there are going to be entities, which there must be if the grounding relation is actually a relation, then you have to say what they are. And it's just not clear what they would be. It's not going to be the rose. It's not going to be a proposition. If it's going to be states of affairs, that's going to be tricky in some cases. And then this nesting case, it's not clear that any of these are going to work. And his response is, yeah, no, I get that. I'm not saying that I know what they are. I'm just saying that we got to have them.
Well, they do have a specific fight over, she thinks that you can capture property talk and everything that we need to understand property talk, because she thinks it's pretty obvious and intuitive without having to posit
So
properties
obvious.
as
It's just so
properties
obvious.
as entities, right? So for example, if you say, how many things do you have in that drawer? And you say, oh, look, it's really empty. There's only one entity in that drawer. And, and you pull out this red rose, and someone comes along and says, well, that entity was full. I mean, that drawer was actually full of entities, because there was the redness of the rose in there, and there was the lightness of the rose in there, and there was the smell of the rose in there. And those are all entities. And she's like, no, you have the rose and you have all these properties, and you don't need to throw in a lot of entity talk to capture what you mean when you say you've got a rose with all these properties. And so, yes, the language, the ontological language of entities is just not needed. And if all you need is to talk, is just this relationship of being a property of, then that relationship can give you truth makers. And that, roses having the property of redness is not an entity. And that can account for the grounding without it being an entity, right? She just doesn't think that you need to have the grounding be a relation between entities. She's going to fight it out over premise too. And that's why RP's ultimate challenge to Hornsby is, okay, go ahead and do that then, right? And in that account, show me how the relationship between this proposition, the rose is red, manages to be with something different from the proposition's relationship to the rose is light, right? Without then calling the redness of the rose and the lightness of the rose different entities, right? So yeah, he just.
But doesn't she? What I didn't understand is how she doesn't actually recommend it. She does by nominalizing sentences. I mean, she gives him credit for the suggestion, even if he doesn't really make that suggestion. But that is her suggestion. Just nominalize the sentences, and those are your entities. So I don't understand why he's asking her to come up with something when that's the suggestion. I mean, granted, he doesn't like that suggestion, but it is hers.
Right, but then she says it's not, it's not needed. You could do that, right? And as he says, yeah, if my point was going to be, yeah, that our language sometimes makes us think they're entities, then that's what I would do. But I don't want this. My arguments don't hang on how our language can be manipulated.
Right.
Oh yeah,
right?
No, fair enough.
Like
I didn't
right? You can.
I didn't understand how
you can talk the smile of a clown can be talked of as an entity by the English language, but that doesn't mean that the smile of the clown is an entity separate from the clown.
I just didn't understand.
So yeah, so he's not going to take that, right?
Is hoping for it. Does she hope for grounding at all? or
Yes.
the truth maker principle
Yes.
at all.
Grounding
But
without
without-
entity.
Yes, but without a relation, right? Without a relation to entities.
Yeah, without a relation beyond because and
Right.
yeah, but beyond the
Yeah.
beyond the
It
beyond
does
the
sound
depend-
like very much like
Yeah.
Horwich.
Sure, but I just
this
never
way,
understood what it really amounts to. Is it just some kind of schema that we accept, or what?
Well, she says things like, right, if you look at her example where she says, oh, look, this is how I'll account for the priority, without talking about, so that you have this grounding relationship where you have two entities and one sort of has metaphysical priority over the other, right? So you have the proposition and you have the redness of the rose, or the way of the rose being red, or whatever it is. And so she says, I'll get the asymmetry because it's something like, I mean, consider a relationship between the set that just has A is F, has something that's F in it because A is F, or something like that, right? And she says,
Oh, yeah,
there's an if
later
and
on,
only
yeah.
if, there's an if and only if relationship there, but there's also an asymmetry because A is F, and she seems to think that that's, you can account for the asymmetries there without answering ontological questions about
I see.
the
So she
status of
wants-
sets.
So she doesn't want a grounding relation. She just wants a dependence with asymmetry. But that's it.
Yeah, she wants the grounding without it being a relation between entities.
I mean, I would just hesitate to call that grounding, but that's semantics. I don't want to worry about that.
Right.
But she does want some kind of dependence. And
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Asymmetric.
yeah.
And it has something to do with, like, for example,
It's-
she says interesting things about, that, which I didn't quite understand, that there's, the rose is red. The rose can be red without the proposition. I was saying that the proposition the rose is red is true, which is on one side of this grounding connection. I guess it's not a relationship. Is to say that there's something that could be thought, right? Because propositions are things that could be thought, right? Which is to say more than to say the rose is red, which
It
could be,
feels-
true in a universe devoid of minds, where
It feels, David.
there's nothing to pick out roses and put them under a category or something like that, right?
It
So-
sounds
so
very
in this-
Davidsonian in that she's wanting to rely on schemas, biconditional schemas without ontology.
Yeah,
Well, not just because she's pointing here that because goes beyond a biconditional, right?
Right.
No,
That
I meant the
bi-
spirit. Of course,
biconditionals
yes,
can-
that
yeah.
asymmetry to it. Yes. Mhm.
Right. And that the way of understanding that is to understand what's on one side being more than what's on the other. So even though they have an if and only if connection, if there's more on one side than the other, then you can get an asymmetry. Right. So, which, it might be a way of, so there's an if and only if connection between the sets and where's that claim?
right. I mean,
Um,
she essentially just
set-
gives like the Kit Fine example. Is essentially what that
Okay.
is, a generalization of it.
Okay.
From the paper we read, from the grounding paper we read,
Right.
essence and modality. Yeah, no, but you go ahead and
Yeah, so she says, like, the set whose sole member is A has a member that is F because A is F, right? And that seems to capture an asymmetry, because you think that it's the A being F that somehow makes the set that has that thing only as its only member have the property of being F, right? So if A is an apple that's furry. It's because it's the set that just has that apple in it that it has the property of being, having something that's furry in it. It's because the one member of that set has that property and not vice versa. But there is going to be an if and only if relationship in that case. That the set whose sole member is A has a member that is F, if and only if A is F. So there's going to be an if and only if, which doesn't have a symmetry. It's asymmetrical if and only if, right? That's the whole point. It's the double-headed arrow. But nonetheless, there's also this because relationship. And how do you understand that? Well, the set whose sole member is A of F has something else in it, right? There's mention of a set. And so that can be the ground of the asymmetry. Even though there's an if and only if symmetrical relationship, there's an asymmetry because this side has something, it has A being F, right? It has the fuzzy apple, but it also has the set that sole member is the fuzzy apple. So there's more there, and that can account for the because relationship. Same thing with the proposition that the rose is red is true if and only if the rose is red. That's a symmetrical, always going to be the case, deflationary if and only if claim. But there's also the because claim, because there's more on this side where you have a proposition that the rose is red. And on this side, you just have the rose being red. And so that could be the basis of the asymmetry that gets you a because, which goes beyond just the if and only if connection. And points out that there's more on this side. Right. Now, what I didn't understand here is why the fact that there's more on this side doesn't show that actually it's not that just the redness of the rose that explains why the proposition that the rose is red is true. Because you have to have all these other facts about there being a proposition, presumably, right? All these facts, all these states that make there be more on this side, right?
So that's where she doesn't say more, and where I imagine, she would, bring in the Davidsonian line. I guess Truth and Predication hadn't been published yet when this paper came out, probably, but we actually just read that in our other group, and I mean you're right, Karen. That's exactly where in that book, Davidson says, well, so you have to that's the point where you have to relate truth to meaning, and so she doesn't, she only gives us like a sketch of an intuition at the end of this paper as to what her alternative might be, since this paper is mostly just a paper critical of our piece paper. But yeah, I think you're right. I think she probably would have to go that direction, and she probably would. I mean, I can't tell, but yeah.
Oh, one other thing before I completely forget that I have to say about this paper that it made me, when she's talking about the four different, she goes from the four different G's to the GSCH1s to GSC4.
The
and then
schemas.
She has the schemas, yeah. And then she has various true propositions along with their normalizations. And she says Dodd is not both in his office and not in his office. And then she's really insistent that most people would think that the truth of the proposition shown in A, a few will say that the truth of the proposition shown in A depends upon what reality is like. And I just didn't get that, because if I'm saying,
yeah, so it's funny because I had the same reaction, because I was like, I'm not actually one of those people, so I don't.
Right, because it's surely made true by either Dodd being in its office and that part being made true, or him not being in his office and that part being true. And that's what makes it true, which is reality, right? It's just that you can know it's true without having to figure out which is the case.
Right. Yeah.
Right, because all you have to know is that truth is, that the reality is bivalent in that way or whatever, like that we don't have half in, half like not in and not, situations. And so you don't need to know which of the true is the case in order to know it's true, but that doesn't mean it isn't made true by reality. Like, I just didn't understand that that was a
no. Is this definitely like betrays coming from some kind of philosophy of language edition that I'm not super familiar with, whether it's some Wittgensteinian thing or
it's just
or
the old
Dummett
analyticity idea. That's all. Not
well,
everybody
so
gave
that's
up on it.
But
yeah, right. That's one. Yeah, one possibility. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
So it's just
weird,
it's just made true by the meaning of the by the logical connective or the,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think why, I don't see why.
by the meaning of or, but
Because you can always ask what's the conjunct that makes a conjunction true, or what's
disjunct.
or what disjunct true. Wait, what's the disjunct that makes a disjunction true, right? And
Right.
so there's an answer, and that would be your truth maker.
I mean, it does seem like a sensible question.
Yeah.
I do not know what she would say in response to it. But in any case, RP is like, well, yeah, but I set aside those propositions.
Yeah, it's true. He doesn't say, what do you mean? Obviously, there's a truth maker for that. It's wherever Dodd is. Yeah.
Yeah,
I just want to know if it was Julian Dodd.
Julian Dodd.
Oh, maybe the other one that gets talked about. Yeah.
And also the editor. Of
He,
this
yes,
program.
probably. Because he was probably at that conference.
Yeah, right, probably.
Or he
okay,
wasn't,
so
right? Either he was or he wasn't.
Or he wasn't.
So-
He was. Yeah, or he wasn't.
with regard to the 4 formulations she gives of this grounding statement, the G3 and G4, are the ones that are sort of more generally formulated and seem to speak more to truth itself, rather than the particular proposition that you happen to be talking about. She, oh wait, actually no, before we get there, I'm sorry, I meant to back up actually even further. Back on 36, the last thing about G1 and G2 is that we were asking, whether or not that with G1 and G2, those are the ones that contain the denoting expressions, and we were asking, do they denote the same thing or different things? The option where they denote the same thing, she says, is problematic, and this made somewhat more sense to me. She says that option doesn't work because then the relation that's expressed is symmetric, since the things on either side are identical. It's a self relation, and so presumably, you can swap the expression. It's symmetric, trivially, but obviously this is meant to express something asymmetric, right? Since truth making and grounding are supposed to be asymmetric. So, so that seems to rule out that argument seems more strongly to rule out that the things denoted on either side of the relation are going to be the same. And that's important because it comes up later when she analyzes the because expression and tries to show that it's actually not even a relation expression. Paying attention to what happens when you interpret the denoting expressions as denoting the same thing. It's really interesting. The argument that comes up later is almost like, to reject the initial way of trying to read the thing in the first place and instead read the because differently. I mean, my first thought when I read this was that there's something. It's still not quite clear to me whether or not maybe they couldn't be the same, and it's just that you have to read the relation as being, intentional, as being intentional in the sense that you can't actually substitute co-referring, denotative expressions to solve a veritate. Like, it may be that if you do have some sort of identity theory, that it's important under what description you're identifying it when you make these grounding locutions or truth-making locutions. But that's something that she doesn't exactly explore, but I thought might be an option that somebody could argue there.
I mean, it's kind of confusing because there is a proliferation of entities that both would agree on, presumably, and that is the proliferation of the entities that are these various propositions. So, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe Hornsby wouldn't want to characterize a proposition as an entity, but maybe she would be happy to do that. So the question is whether or not the entities that are proliferating are truth makers, right? Rather than just propositions. So, yeah. Because I mean, I think RP, Rodriguez-Pereyra, is committed to each proposition being an entity, because when he says that grounding is a relationship between entities, one of the entities is a proposition, right? So propositions have to have entity status. And the other entity is a truth maker, right? So in this infinite, the truth of the truth of the truth of P, if you make that into a proposition, then that can exist as an entity on one side of the, and that's going to be different because it's a different proposition. Presumably the proposition that it is true that the proposition the rose is red is true is a different entity from it is true that the rose is red. Maybe not. I guess that's an interesting question. All very confusing. All very confusing.
Yeah, well, all right, so what's the...
I think the most challenging part of her argument is the attention paid to Rose's redness. You know, when I read RP's paper, the first one, I immediately thought of tropes, and he doesn't say that. I take that to be because trope theory is, is marginal. And maybe states of affairs is another way of dealing with it. And perhaps he just wanted to be neutral. And I feel vindicated in that. In his response, he pretty much says that. He says, maybe it's tropes, maybe it's states of affairs. Look, I don't want to get involved. Not just yet anyway. But it is a good challenge. I mean, whoever does come up with a final theory for truth makers does have to settle on something. And so she's saying, well, if it's states of affairs, you're going to have problems with like negations. If it's tropes, well, who believes in tropes anyway? And if it's nominalizations, well, okay, I'll go for that. But then that has other consequences. I think it's an interesting question to ask, even if you can't pin RP on it. At least I ask myself this question.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me kind of wants to skip to the details of like whether or not we need to posit negative states of affairs or what makes counterfactuals true, rather than
We'll do that
I know,
next week, actually.
yeah.
We're doing
rather
this.
than getting hung
Okay,
up
good.
on whether there's a truth maker relationship at all. You know? So I am happy enough to say, look, let's call them entities, whatever they are, and then we can discuss, well, what kind of entities are there and aren't there?
Yeah, that's basically RP's thesis. Look, I don't know what they are,
right.
but they got to be there. Let's just
Right,
get past
right.
that premise. They got to be there, whatever they are.
But he's also, as he's, I'm not side on the debate or entities that are negative facts or something, or whether or not any negative fact is made true by, or any negative statement is made true by some non-negative fact, right? If it's true. So I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to jump into that stuff and leave all this groundwork as done, or as
Me too. I mean,
close
who
enough.
cares? Who cares? Let's say PR is right, but then, yeah, what makes the modal propositions true? What makes the negative facts true? Like,
Right.
I want to do all that work, like this.
Yeah.
And it may be
Hmm.
that in doing that work, we determine what the entities are. If there have to be
Yeah.
entities, like what they are is going to be determined by the work in these other areas. Exactly. Uh,
Well, I think it's going to be something like whatever Armstrong or Lewis says, if only because I can't think of anything else. But I think
I'm
it's
on Team
worth.
Armstrong.
Yeah, well, I'm at the point. I think I'm on Team RP, which is his team says, look, it's either it's one of those guys, but stop pretending that you can get away without entities. I think that's the more important thing
Right.
to get started, because there's a lot of skepticism. I mean, I was getting skepticism from you, Josh, earlier, because you were worried that whatever might be posited, it's just not going to, as you say, do any explanatory work. And I think that's the kind of worry that RP is turning his attention to, if not explicitly in what he wrote, I think in spirit. He's wanting to say the entities can account for the explanatory work, even independently of identifying exactly what these entities are.
Yeah,
In fact,
but
he
I
does say something about this.
these are entities only for the synthetic propositions. I mean, there's
No, not because nothing can be said for the ones that aren't synthetic, but just because you tackle one thing at a time. It's just harder to do the other ones.
I'm just deeply concerned that he's already granting that propositions are entities, and I'm not sure why the world then needs to serve as truth makers for a lot of the propositions once you've granted that much.
Are you suggesting that having granted that propositions are entities, we already have truth makers?
No, I just think it's an important distinction, and it has to do with the nature of entailment. And I mean, we just learned so many lessons from these other papers that are just going unacknowledged here. And I'm just not even willing to really engage with such a, well, I have engaged, but I think it's hard to accept some claim that is so,
Unwillingly.
You,
I
you
mean,
mean you
these are
want to?
two,
You mean you have the will to disengage?
yeah, I have a huge will to disengage. But I mean, these two
but
huge claims, like, truth makers are entities, and the nature of this relation is entailment. But entailment, with asymmetry, there's just a lot to just say, like, okay, I'm not even sure that's coherent. But even granted that, then you could have propositions do a lot of the truth making work for, like, the logical truths, the necessary truths, and a lot of the modal truths might just be, propositional. And then, I'm not sure that the world is going to be doing much work at that point, even for the synthetic propositions, or for any entity that you can point out in the world. You can also point out a proposition that's doing the same work, and then the question of resolving which one is doing the work. I guess I'm not sure. It just seems kind of incoherent to me.
Well, first of all, entailment is not supposed to be a relationship between the truth maker and the truth, but rather between the truth and, by truth here I mean true proposition. Let me say it again. The entailment is not supposed to be a relation between the true proposition and the truth maker, but rather between the true proposition and the existence of the truth maker. So what the work that the truth maker does is providing for its existence, right? Which is another proposition from which it is entailed, from which the proposition is entailed. But to put it another way, all truths are made true by existence propositions. And that's explanatory.
Was he explicit about that in the first paper? I don't remember him
I mean,
being explicit about that.
maybe not, but I think all of them have said this. And I think the response does make it explicit. The
Does
problem
it?
is that I'm not really sure, because I also read the introduction by BB and Dodd to the second anthology, and I'm not sure what I saw there that I didn't see here. Sorry about that. But it is something that they've all been saying, namely that when there is an entailment relation appealed to in explanation of the truth maker relation, it's not between the truth maker and the proposition, but between the existence of the truth maker and the proposition, where the existence of the proposition is itself just another proposition.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that's at all correct. I mean, the argument is that all truth-making relationships are between entities, and that the nature of that entails the truth of the proposition. So you're already going from the world to the proposition with that entailment. It's not the world makes true an existence proposition, and then the entailment is between that and then whatever other proposition. That's not his argument at all. I don't even
That
understand.
was somebody's argument, but I don't think
It was
no, it's not
somebody's, but
his.
it wasn't his. Yeah.
I'll check.
Right, because that's when we had that big fight about whether or not it was real entailment. And
Oh,
because then we were saying, even if you say there's this connection between the world and existence propositions, you have to explain that, and that can't be entailment.
Right.
hmm.
So because the world isn't a proposition, and so it can't entail anything. So then we had a clarification, maybe it was like revised Davidson, that yeah, it's pseudo, it's sort of entailment, or then we had a lot of other things of like it's a non-entailment necessitation. Yeah, it's just a relationship.
Well,
I was looking through what, like trying to figure out what I'd read of Hornsby before, and a lot of her stuff is on actions and intentions.
yeah.
I'm wondering if any of that
Let me read this from the first article.
focus on.
From RP real quick. He says that TM claims that, this is on page 233 in EJ Lowe's. He says TM claims that true propositions are made true by entities, but again, propositions must be entities anyways, and which entails that truth supervenes upon whether things are.
Where are you?
233, second full paragraph. But to distinguish ways presupposes. Entails that truth supervenes upon whether things are. That's what TM claims, which is the truth-making principle.
Yeah, but that's not an entailment from the entities to the truths. That's an
Right.
entailment between principles.
Yeah.
Well, that's the focus there is on that language of whether things are, not just how things are,
Right.
right? Because he's trying to argue that, against sort of Hornsby's point that when you're talking about properties, you're just talking about how the rose is, and you don't need to talk about whether or not the redness of the rose is a separate entity from the lightness of the rose. You can just talk about how the rose is, and everybody knows that it's the redness of the rose that's relevant to the truth of, is the road red, that the rose is red, and not the lightness that's relevant. And you don't need to make it about whether things are. You can just make it about how things are. But RP wants to make that change, that you can't talk about how things are in your truth-making theory without addressing the issue of whether things are, because of the ways we identify ways and distinguish them from each other.
Right, but the point is that when you're talking about how things are, you're effectively already quantifying over some things. You may as well just admit it. And then when he says that it supervenes upon whether things are, the whether is propositions about what is and what isn't. That is, what exists and what doesn't exist. So whether or not something is, that is, whether or not something exists, is then the proposition that entails the truth. So I am seeing there what I said.
I think that's
explicit as I would
But-
like.
The proposition that the rose is red would be made true by the proposition about the existence of the redness, right?
It would be made true by the existence of the redness of the rose.
The proposition that
It would
redness
be-
exists.
It would be
entails-
entailed. So the proposition that the rose is red is entailed by the proposition that the redness of the rose exists.
Exists, right? But it's not the truth making.
Right.
Truth making is
No, the
transitive,
truth
is that
maker is
idea?
the truth maker is just the redness of the rose.
right. But why? Yeah. So the, I think he might say that the entailment can go the other way then too, if, I mean, right, that because it's probably
Right.
an if and only if
Yeah,
connection.
no, the entailment can go both ways.
The redness of the rose
The grounding doesn't.
entails that
The
the
gr-
rose, but the grounding doesn't, because because
Right.
both of those things have the same truth maker.
Well, but the grounding is a relation between the proposition and the truth maker, whereas the entailment is a relation between the proposition and the proposition that the truth maker exists. So the entailment can go both ways, but the grounding relation remains asymmetric.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that I don't think you need to mention the proposition that the truth maker exists.
You do if you want to speak of entailment.
Well, if you could also say that it entails that, the rose is not blue.
Well, he doesn't commit himself to exactly which way something is amounts to, it turns out to be the truth maker. And I'm not committing him to that either. I'm just pointing out that there's a difference between the grounding relation and the entailment relation, such that you can get both entailment to be a relation between propositions and the grounding relation not to be so, and insofar as it is not an entailment relation, be asymmetric in the way that entailment can't be.
Right, but you could be arguing for something like the only true. So you could say that, look, there are certain relationships that can only hold between entities of a certain type, right? So is the relationship of being is 3 greater than can only hold between numbers or something like that, right? Or things that can be enumerated. And so you could say the only thing that can be part of the truth-making relationship is an entity that is on one side a chunk of reality, and on the other side a proposition that is an existence proposition. And that I think he would deny. There's no need for saying, well, that it's a relationship between a chunk of reality and a proposition that is an existence proposition.
Yeah, I know, I deny
Right.
that too. I'm not saying that.
Yeah. Okay. So the truth maker can be, it could be the redness of the rose making the following proposition true: the rose is not blue, and the rose is not green, and the rose is not orange. And that could be a direct relationship without having to talk about any propositions entailing other propositions. Now, it might be interesting that there's a large class of things that a truth maker makes true that entail each other, right? In fact, maybe all things that a truth maker makes true. That's an interesting question. I have to think about that. Entail each other. Is that true? I don't know.
All right,
But,
where are we in the text exactly?
I got nothing more. I mean, I'm ready
Okay.
when you are.
Okay, yeah.
There is a little
Abandoned
more here. We haven't
ship.
commented. I mean, we haven't commented on everything. That's true, but I'm satisfied with what we've got down. There's her exploration of the converse of GS, but maybe we already talked about that. I mean, she has
Maybe
her
what
way of
we need to
dealing with
do-
it, but then there's her addressing his way.
Maybe what we need to do is some lab work where we set out to explain the truth of the proposition. Unicorns don't exist, but they could.
Yeah.
If we figure out whether or not.
Can we use your bear
that's-
and the mat for the lab work?
Yeah,
'Cause at least we can afford that
Very
equipment.
fluid. I can write this off on my taxes. No, so we're gonna if we can figure out the truth of that and what makes it true or false, and then we can go back and see if we find any surprising entities. Right.
All right, well, I think I mean, I think there were a couple of other interesting points in the paper before we sort of move on, but
Abandoned ship.
yeah, but I mean, I guess we already sort of mentioned the con statements, right? Which are just like, she's just trying to bring out why is it that, or how is it that we're supposed to understand the asymmetry of the because, if, these other,
Yeah.
analyses don't work, and essentially she she seems to want to say that we shouldn't, necessarily think of I guess she wants to say that she doesn't think we should necessarily think of it as being a relation expression, right? Instead, she thinks we should understand the asymmetry simply in virtue of the asymmetry of the content, of the necessary distinction between the content of what's on either side of the because one of them is necessarily propositional and the other is, not necessarily propositional. I thought the footnote 11 on page 42 was really, really quite fascinating.
I didn't read it. Okay.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. So the part just before the footnote marker, superscript says Rodriguez-Pereyra. I can't
Don't
say
blame
it.
me.
No,
RP,
no.
RP for the Anglos.
RP. RP says that grounding is, if a relation, an asymmetric one. She says, I agree. A certain asymmetry in our thinking about truth needs to be explained. I shall attempt to show that whatever the explanation may be, there cannot be any need to call upon an ontology of truth makers in order to provide it. And she tries to bring this out by, so that there's a footnote there where she says, one might wonder whether my agreement with the claim that grounding is asymmetrical, if a relation, could amount to anything more than my denial that grounding is a relation between entities. A different example can help to show that it does amount to more. The example is the word by, as it is used in, she poisoned them by tampering with their water supply. If one sides with Anscombe and Davidson and thinks that the phrase her poisoning them and the phrase her tampering with the water supply may denote one and the same event, then given that she didn't tamper with their water supply by poisoning them, and notice that's the reverse of the initial statement, right? It leads to inconsistency to suppose that by expresses a relation between events. The inconsistency is one to which in section 1.2 earlier, we saw that RP would be led if he were to identify the states of affairs of P as being true with the state of affairs that is P's truth maker. The word by, one might say, is not a relation, but an adverb former. But one still understands the claim that it behaves asymmetrically. I thought that was extremely
This is bringing
interesting.
back why I thought Hornsby talked about part whole relation. Maybe she talked about the relationships between events in her work on action. I remember this famous example about poisoning.
Yeah, no, I did not know this example. Yeah, I mean the substitution thing.
I still don't understand how to relate this example to the very first sentence. Anyone's wondering whether her agreement with the claim that grounding is asymmetrical, if a relation could amount to anything more than, I still don't understand her denial that grounding is a relation between entities. I can understand her article as a rejection of grounding, but what else is there to grounding except as a relation between entities? How else is she thinking of it? Exactly.
Yeah, no, me too, actually. I mean, I also had trouble with that. I mean, it seemed to me like that what she actually showed was that if you keep to these explanatory locutions as opposed to talking about grounding, then you just have to explain them in terms of the distinction between what type of thing can be the explanans versus what type of things can be the explanandum. as opposed to, actually positing a particular kind of relation. That's what I thought she was ultimately saying. So I agree, that first sentence in the footnote is actually strange because it kind of seems like she is rejecting.
So in other words, it becomes a relation between descriptions.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure I don't know if she would say it's a relation at all or what, but yeah, it's, I guess, maybe. But
I mean, by relation, I just mean like in the way that adverb formation is a relation between.
Oh, sure, I guess.
Linguistic entities.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
It's just not objectual. There's a semantic assent before the relation, to put it another way.
Well, I think in this example, it's supposed to be not a relation between entities because if there's an entity, it's the same entity, right? It's the same event.
Right.
But there's still an asymmetry in that adverb when described under the adverb of poisoning them, the tampering with their water supply explains the poisoning of them, rather than the poisoning of them explaining the tampering of the water supply. So there's this asymmetry, but there's not two distinct things in relationship.
That's my point. So like if we say the event is E, then what is being related is not E to E, but rather E under description D1 to E under description D2, which effectively is a relation between D1 and D2.
Is it a relationship between the descriptions? Or
Well, no.
Otherwise, there's no
the
asymmetry. You
world?
can't have asymmetry if there's only one event.
No, you can't, because you have the dependence of the
Well, she wants to say that the asymmetry.
putting the
I mean, I feel like that she wants to say that the asymmetry simply comes down to the fact that the explanans must be propositional, or must be something which can be said or thought, I guess is what she says, right?
well. So if it, I mean, think of it.
Is that right?
I think this example is not.
Oh no, the explanandum. Sorry, I'm getting
Can you be
confused.
explicit? Can you be explicit about which like what's
Sorry,
Right, so
the thing that's sorry, yeah, the thing to be explained has to be the thing that can be thought or said, because we're explaining why something's true, the truth of something.
Sure, but
So if you, I don't like this example, but if it's something like calling your brother a namby-pamby is also insulting your brother. Let's say he's sensitive about being called namby-pamby. Then you could say that there's an asymmetry then in that it's the saying of the namby-pambiness that explains the fact that you've insulted your brother with that very same event, rather than that you've insulted your brother explaining the namby-pamby comment. And yet is it a relationship between the two descriptions, the description insulting your brother and calling him a namby-pamby? Or is it just that you're talking about the description?
Well, I mean, that's one way, right? I mean, a more realistic reading might be something like insulting your brother by calling him a namby-pamby is a determinable of the determinant of calling him a namby-pamby or something like that.
But unless those are distinct events, you can't establish an asymmetry, because identity is not asymmetric.
No, they're the same event, the asymmetry is in the adverbalizations.
But that's just a description. That's my point.
So
No, but
My-
it's not a relationship between the descriptions per se. It's
Adverbs
a,
are descriptions. You can't adverbalize anything but a description.
but it's showing a relationship.
So
It's showing that the properties of the event ground each other, right? The property of it being the vocalization of namby-pamby grounds the fact that it's an insult to your brother. So it's not really necessarily the relationship between the descriptions qua linguistic entities in the world or something.
So you think she's going to be reluctant to admit to truthmaker entities, but sanguine about admitting properties as entities?
Not
Well,
as
she seems to
entities.
think-
She doesn't think that they have to be considered entities.
I don't understand what she thinks about properties at all.
I don't
From
think
what
she's
she
gonna
wrote,
bring- I don't think she's going to bring in properties.
She was like, obviously we all know how to deal with properties.
What do you mean she's not
It's
going to
like-
bring in properties? She says, look, all
Because
you
she's
need
a
is
good Davidsonian.
properties. You don't need,
Where?
you don't need, okay. It's on page 40. Well, the response, the first second paragraph on the page. Well, our response to this claim is likely to be that talk of ways in this connection requires endorsement at most of properties. Right.
Mhm.
We think that the way the rose is, in virtue of which the rose is red, is true in the way that ripe tomatoes are, namely red. And here what red is used to say, and here where red is used to say what different things have in common, it can hardly stand for the rose's redness. So let us allow that being red and being light are properties, both of them ways of the rose. This is not to deny that there may be other sorts of views of the way of the rose or how the rose is. Allow the existence of
Yeah.
properties at this point is to concede very little, as one sees if one considers that we have no grasp on the existence or non-existence of the property, or for example, redness independent of its being possible or impossible to meaningfully say of things that they are or they are not red, right? So the whole point is that we can just use properties talks. We don't need entities talks. Right. I don't need to say that in the drawer, there's 17,000 things, the rose and its redness and its lightness and its sweetness and its diameter and its pointiness and it's all those other things. I can just say, look, there's the rose and there's 17,000 properties that I can think of if you give me long enough. And those aren't entities.
But I think
They're
it's just because she
properties.
thinks that you can have property talk without admitting to properties. In fact, in the footnote, she pretty much says she doesn't want to deal with it at all. Of course, she says, controversies about properties' existence may be answerable to different theoretical concerns from many in play here. Then more substantial requirements on their existence will be imposed. So, yeah, I don't know exactly. I think she's just wanting to say that.
It's very strange. She seems to be saying here that, okay, there's something, I guess that I didn't quite get the first time I read this, but it's kind of peculiar because I'm not used to thinking this way, but she's saying that that the common noun red may denote a property, but that still isn't the same thing as saying that the phrase "the rose's redness," denotes the same thing as the word red, as the
Makes
word
that
red
an
does.
entity. Yeah.
She's sort of separating those locutions and saying one may denote, well, I guess, and it's not clear that the other must denote the same thing. But I mean,
Yeah, I don't fully
that may
follow
be-
the
that may-
logic
that
here,
may-
but I very much doubt she's admitting for the properties to stand as entities, considering that the very next section is to deny that there are any available entities to function.
Right. Yeah.
as-
No, she doesn't think properties are entities. yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's.
Or if they
I
are, like
mean,
if there is some abstract universal of redness,
Really?
it's not going to be the truth maker for
that's
Exactly.
what
It's
she
not gonna
rose
help.
being red,
Right.
right? It's
That's-
just that.
that's what she thinks.
Yeah.
It's not, she admits at least for the sake of argument. It's not clear that she
Right.
actually believes it, but she does admit in this section for the sake of argument that, the noun red may denote a property. She still thinks it's not going to get you the kind of truth maker that, well, in particular that the G1 and G2, formulations seem to demand.
Right,
It'll still get
because
truth.
the abstract universal won't do it. You need the abstract particular, the trope.
Right. She wants truth
Yeah.
making without truth making entities. In fact, I think she has a, isn't that what this is called?
That's the title, right?
Or- That's the title, right? So
Yeah.
there, you know, a thing having a property is enough to make a proposition that basically attributes that property to that thing true. And that's not to say that there is a separate entity, which is the fact or the state of affairs of that thing having a property. You just need the thing and the fact that, and the, you know, you just need the thing and that will, and the fact that it instantiates that, or it's instantiating that property, and that's enough. You don't need a separate entity. Whereas, and so RP sort of throws down the thing and throws down the gauntlet and says, okay, but it's a different, you know, how do you explain the difference between the rose and all its instantiations making the rose's red true versus the rose's light true, without treating the redness of the rose as a distinct entity from the lightness of the rose.
Since the focus of her paper is criticizing his claims, I think I lost sight of her making the positive case for how to get truth makers without entities.
Mm-hmm.
All I saw was criticism of his argument that one needs them. But does she actually give us the truth maker principle without entities?
She gives us a account of how you can get the priority. It's kind of like, she's sort of similar to Wilson. So I think maybe when Kenny was talking, maybe Josh made me think of this, that, you know, Wilson says, we don't need big G grounding because the main thing that big G grounding is a flag for asymmetrical metaphysical dependence. And there's the asymmetry is basically about priority. And to get that priority, all you need is foundations and the fundamental. And I can give you a separate account of the fundamental. Then you can just have relations, and the ones that get you towards the fundamental, that's your asymmetry. That's your priority. And then, but here Hornsby is saying, well, look, I can give you these connections and these because connections, and then I can show you what it is about these because connections that makes them different from straightforward if and only if connections. Right? So why Truthmaker talk gets you beyond just deflation about truth. So the rose is red is true if and only if the rose is red. I can show you why there's an important difference on both sides of those if and if sentence, so that it's the case that the rose is red is true because the rose is red and not vice versa. Right, so I can get you the asymmetry and that sketchy account at the end that I'm not sure I fully understood. For the reasons Kenny points out, it seems. Yeah.
Were any of you persuaded?
I mean, I was mostly confused.
Yeah. That's fair enough. Yeah.
Especially at the end, I was really not really.
What do you think of footnote 13? Did you read that? I'm looking at it now, and it seems to speak to some of this. Let me just read it. So
yeah.
Well, actually, let's see. How did you put it? Where the marker is? I kind of liked that way of saying it. She says, we carry on using sentence nominalizations, but refuse to dignify their denotations with the status of entities. I'm not sure what it means, right? Because nominalizations name something, right? Or is that the idea just that you can have
they name
as per nominalist the nominalist view, the name stands on its own without having to be referential. Is that the idea?
Or
we're just talking about language. That's all it is.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
originally.
putting words. I mean, of course, yeah, of course. You put words in quotes. Okay, so you have the word dog, right? And then you put it in quotes. What does that refer to? To the word, but there's no additional entity. It's just words.
Yes, that.
Okay, right. Okay, but the problem is that is an entity. It's just not an entity of the kind that truth maker theorists want.
It's not entity of the scary kind that
it's not the scary kind. They are entities. They're undignified entities.
Right. Yeah.
Footnote 13. I don't here broach the difficult question what semantic treatment is to be given of examples such as the second schema. Which is the second one? Shoot, just tell me.
It's one of the denotative ones. It's the one
The truth of
with the
P is
truth.
explained determination by nominalist P.
Oh, the determination.
Nominalization of P. Yeah.
Such as the second one's instance provide, which it must be acknowledged appear to be of the form A relates to B where, or ARB where R is a term for a relation. If that is their form, then one must give up the premise, one must give up premise 3 of the argument, namely relations link entities, or one must allow that there is a thinner conception of an entity than that which lies behind RP's argument for reification. I note that there is a good reason. I know that there is a reason not to speak of truth makers beyond our not wanting to dignify the putative candidates with entityhood. Consider A, the roses being red explains nothing since the rose is not red. That's not like you, Josh. The roses being red explains nothing since the rose is not red. And B, Z's being red might have made it true that a rose was red. A and B, and examples like them, suggest that that which RP calls a truth maker is sometimes introduced without affirmation of the proposition in question. Compare, a proposition can be propounded without being asserted or thought of as true. Okay, so I didn't understand that second paragraph at all. Maybe it's just because those two examples didn't sink in yet.
Yeah, so if
so if the rose is not red,
if you
right, then what makes it true that the rose is not red? Well, certainly not the rose being red. So the roses being red explains nothing. Sure, of course, but what are we supposed
but
to
it
do?
sounds like but I guess if you're trying to explain the truth maker for the whole proposition, the roses being red explains nothing since the rose is not red. Do you have to suggest that the roses being red is an entity even if there's no red rose? Is that the issue?
So this is a subtle and interesting thing. I feel like this is more worthy of actually being in the text than the footnote. That's weird. What she's saying is that you know, in that A sentence, there is a phrase, the roses being red. It appears to be, you know, a denoting phrase. But it doesn't explain anything since the rose is not red. So that seems to suggest that although things can be apparent, can appear as denoting phrases, not all, you know, denotative phrases actually denote anything, right? You know, and she could have gone on to give some sort of, you know, Russellian or Strassonian type of analysis about this. She didn't, but that's, I think, the kind of thing she's trying to point out, like, you know, that she's trying to drive home that just because there is a denoting phrase there doesn't mean that, you know, we should think that you know, alone implies a realism about the content or whatever.
I personally, I think
don't know.
This is an overly complicated way to draw our attention back to the problem of negative proposition, negative existentials, and disjunctions. And modals, right? So, I mean, he says, yeah, of course these are problems. Well, metaphysicians will deal with it. And what about the other one? Z's being red might have made it true that a rose is red.
No, I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that's just the modal one. So we got the negative existential on A, and the B is the
okay.
One. Yeah, so whatever. We'll see if Lewis can fix this. Otherwise, we're up the creek, in my opinion.
I actually don't even understand B though.
Okay, let's take a look.
What is even
I mean,
the modal content? What is Z?
Maybe Z's a particular white rose.
But I see.
Yeah. Z is a white rose. If it had been red, then it would have made it true that rose was red.
Oh, so it's being read. Okay, I see. Right.
Right. But it's another one of those phrases like Z's being red that seems to refer to an entity. So we
I
might
see.
assume there is one, but Z's white. So what entity does Z's being red refer to?
Right.
So we might want to say
see.
that this is made true, but not by a truth maker like Z's being white. I mean, sorry, Z's being red. I mean, I think
Yeah.
what RP is going to say, well, I'm open to the possibility that that whole thing is made true by Z's being white.
What is it to
Right.
propound a proposition? I have to look that up. To propound. I hope it's not a
Offer,
philosophical
just-
word.
So, no, it's just to offer.
It's not affirm because she's saying without
To
asserting,
offer.
right?
No, it's just to like
Well-
present or offer up.
To put forward an idea. Okay, got it. Yeah.
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 There's another word for propose, actually, right? Propose is like to
Yeah.
entertain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, like entertain, yeah.
Right. Well, I think that even
I mean,
propounded or entertained or put forward propositions have to have truth makers, and
Yeah, I guess
it's like the false propositions. You know, you can say false things, and
Wait, but
they're gonna
for
have-
B it can't just be the roses being white that makes it true. There has to be something else like that makes true that if it had been red, it would have made the proposition true, which brings in something like a fact about truth making, about that relation, right?
maybe. I mean, I don't want to say anything because until we have a way to deal with these modal, I forget, how did Armstrong suggest that we should deal with modal truths?
by using the non-modal ones. Because I think if I remember correctly, he said that whether or not a proposition is contingent is a matter of reality. Like it's a matter or whether or not a state of affairs or I forget what his truth makers were, chunks of reality or contingent chunks of reality is down to them, not to this possible world network. So once you say something is contingently so, it makes true all the things that could be different about it in that respect, right? So if Boris is contingently on the mat and it's something about this state of affairs that makes it a contingent state of affairs, that's going to make true the statements Boris could not be on the mat. The contingency of this state of affairs. You don't need possible worlds where Boris is off the mat. It's just the fact that in this world, Boris being on the mat is a contingent matter, can be a truth maker for things like Boris could not be on the mat. And so there are things in this world that are necessary, and then it's not going to be the case that they could be otherwise. But the difference between contingent and necessary is a matter of this world, not possible worlds. And so they can be the truth makers for modal claims. Right, their contingency is a property that has bounds, and those are the bounds that would presumably define what's possible.
Okay.
I think that was the story.
Can I ask you to comment once more on our conversation this afternoon? Do you have any second thoughts on any of it?
I had a strong sense that everything I was saying was true.
I can say that symmetrically.
Anything in particular?
What were you guys talking about?
Oh, read it yourself. It's in hash truth. It basically, I don't know what we said a bunch of things. It relates truth making to grounding and explanation,
So the background is the discussion Sunday where it seemed somewhat
Schaffer.
Yeah, of Schaffer. It seemed like
Oh boy, I gotta show you guys this video. So you remember that video you sent us of Williamson with the stammering?
Wait, which one?
Which one?
The one you said you couldn't listen to because it was too
The one that was
painful.
like 6
Again,
minutes.
which one?
Well, I'm not sure which one.
No, the one about Wittgenstein's
Okay.
philosophy.
The
With
one with
Horowitz?
the
The one?
modal. No, we want the modal. Oh, I don't know. One of the ones is from this channel, which has all of these like 2 to 5 minute clips of various philosophers, and it just finds like a lecture with them or an interview,
Oh,
and it just
no.
clips every time they like use
Oh no.
like a phrase or a buzzword that they most often repeat.
Yeah.
And there are like 5 with Schaffer where
Oh,
he just
no.
like repeats the phrase metaphysical inquiry like literally 87 times in a single like hour-long lecture.
Oh no, I forgot. Yeah, there's like 5-minute video I posted where Williamson just
Yeah.
says the modal something like 100
Yeah.
times. within an
Yeah,
hour.
no,
Yeah.
it's intense.
Post it. I want to see
The videos are great. Oh yeah, no, I will. I'll post it.
Okay. So the context
Sick audio.
was that Josh and Karen were very persuaded with Wilson's attack on the potential for a unified account of grounding, especially with respect to at least one that I would defend, because I mean she's attacking all of them, but I'm defending one, namely trying to use mirology, and in particular because the truthmaker relation wouldn't be satisfied by a mirological account of how the truthmaker is supposed to ground by being a part of or the parts of the true proposition. Obviously, because the true proposition is abstract and the truth makers are concrete. Not that that's an obstacle necessarily, but it certainly, makes you wonder. And I fell back on saying that maybe we had to reimagine what the truth maker relation to grounding really is going to be, that it wouldn't be a straightforward grounding relation, and I got stuck. But then on Slack this afternoon, I thought, after beginning to read some of this, no, actually, I think it can be made to work if you are creative about what propositions actually are. And since we haven't done the metaphysics of propositions, and I know very little about what the options there are, I started to be inclined to defend the view that the unified account does work in a straightforward way if we're just more open-minded or about propositions. But immediately, Josh pushed back and said that it wasn't even so much that as that it doesn't do any explanatory work. And we got caught up in the relation between explanation and grounding as metaphysical causation. And then it got confusing. And I have to say I was confused after that.
Well, I will say my post in #truth at 231 is probably the best attempt I've made at articulating my concerns with grounding. And it basically just seems that
there is nothing at 231. Oh wait, I'm in a different time zone.
PM. Oh, oh, that's so funny. All right, I'll look at it. I see it's right. I see it.
But yeah, with the background, it's Schaefer basically convincing me that, or persuading me strongly, I should say, that I want to say it in all this in the background, I've come to accept a very strong methodological point, which is that when taking a position, it seems that what one is doing in philosophy is saying, given some set of concerns, this position is coherent. And what it takes to sort of root it out from others is expanding the conditions of which one is considering that position under. And so this sort of piecemeal approach to philosophy that we're seeing, where one philosopher responds to another, then critiques the argument, I'm finding so exhausting, because it seems that it's not until you do the whole work, like a metaphysical like framework, like Armstrong or Lewis, that you really root out all of the edge cases, and you motivate the entire thing. So having said that, just in just considering these little pieces of the puzzle, there are certain consistencies that lead me to believe that truth-making can't be a grounding relationship, because as we were exploring in a couple of papers, this metaphysical dependence seems to be this part-whole constitution relationship, and that is not the case for truth-making. It just isn't. It's not a part-whole constitution metaphysical determinant. It's just not that. And so if you...
Yeah, it is.
So it seems at least there are two types of metaphysical dependence. One is some kind of grounding, and something else is another kind of grounding, and that's enough to poke a hole
So
in
so it's
grounding.
so you're saying it seems like big G grounding, if there is to be such a thing, has to be something kind of like the part whole relation.
Yeah, yeah. But that does not hold for truth making, as far as I can tell. There's just too many issues with it. Unless,
Why
again,
why
unless there
why
is something
why
like an identity theory or like an early Russellian analysis of propositions. So it does kind of rest on an analysis of propositions. There is something there in the background that needs to be done to determine, I think, fully.
Or something else. I have something else in mind, but I'm going to save it until we read about the metaphysics of propositions.
Yeah, well, we're definitely gonna have to do that. I mean, I'd like to do that as well. Actually, it's a long time.
Okay, but
Long
before
time
we
coming.
do that, let's close out for today. And before we
Wait,
do
yeah,
that,
no, I have one last thing about
Okay.
section 3 here, which may or may not speak to Josh's feelings vis-a-vis Wilson about grounding. So it's the beginning of section 3 on page 41. She just lays out, verbatim the the main argument that Rodriguez-Pereyra, I can't say it, RP gives for Aunt G, right? So it's very straightforward. It says it's truth is grounded, grounding is a relation, relations link entities, therefore truth is grounded in entities. And I kind of thought about this a little bit, and there was something that was sort of bugging me about it, because this is a paper and a book about truth makers, and if we're trying to give a theory of truth making, it's not really clear why why we have to sort of change frames over to this whole issue of grounding. This argument seems like it could have just been given directly, in a sense, in terms of truth. Like, we could have just said something like, we could have just had a parallel argument, which is something like, P is true, truth is a relation, relations link entities, so
Yeah.
P is made true by entities.
That's fine.
And this sort of slippage, right? The fact that some big G grounding gives way to just some more direct formulation, of the metaphysical topic, in question. It just makes me wonder, how much extra work is actually being done by bringing in this notion of grounding. Why couldn't we have just said P is true, truth is a relation, relations link entities, therefore P is made true by entities?
There you go. Yeah.
I think it's probably because the first question is going to be to defend the premise that truth is a relation. What kind of relation is it?
Right. But just
someone's going to say, oh, it's a grounding relation. And so then you
there may be very many
so
different
it's that
theories.
way, and then you say, oh well, it's so I think it's just because grounding is the
perhaps
that seems to fit the idea of in virtue of.
I guess my point is that task would be then to explain what it is to be the truth-making relationship. But the argument as it was laid out, would already conclude with the existence of truth makers, because I mean, you'd be saying, well, you know, P is made true by entities in that conclusion. You may need to further, you know, elaborate or explicate or, you know, give a theory saying, you know, what it is to be made true, but as to the existence of the truth-making entities, it would be sufficient.
Mhm.
Well, hold on. So you're saying so RP denies that truth is a primitive notion, but that move he would have to grant that truth is a primitive notion, right? It is just that relation between entities.
Yeah. So, does he deny that it's a relation?
Yeah,
I
he
missed
does.
that. Okay. I
No,
see.
he denies that it is a
Wait.
primitive notion, truth itself.
Oh, well, I
But
mean, just saying it's a relation doesn't mean it's primitive, but I mean,
well, if truth is the relation,
whether it is or not.
Why
I
are you saying
mean,
truth is
are
a
the
relation?
only
Do you mean
relations that are
truth-making?
real primitive? I mean, I don't.
You mean truth?
That's a
in
different
virtue of
issue.
is a primitive notion on his account. In virtue of that relation,
Oh, sure. Yeah, right.
which he takes to be
Right,
the
yeah,
grounding
that's another
relation.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rodrigo's right, is that a lot of people might not be tempted to think truth is a relation. They might think truth is a property of propositions.
Right.
Yeah.
And in virtue of what does it have that property? In virtue of the
Well, the
truth.
truth-making. The truth-making.
Well,
is
look, that's sort of the
properties
yeah,
are
exactly. Yeah,
grounded,
just
but
in
that
virtue of
doesn't-
the truth making. Yeah.
What?
Properties
No,
are grounded, but that doesn't mean properties are relations as a
it
consequence.
can't be in virtue of the truth making, but in virtue of the truth maker, because the in virtue is the truth making relation.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Well, I mean, actually, I mean, isn't part of part of Hornsby's point in this is section 4, you know, is that actually part of what we see in the asymmetry is that there's more to the content of something's being true than the truth maker. I mean, there is its meaning, the fact that it has conditions under which it is true, which are which are met by the truth maker, right? What I'm saying is, you know, it's not the truth maker alone, right? I mean, except
Yeah, I'm wondering if
except
that's
insofar as, you know, we take for granted in some context that something has a meaning.
So this
Right.
is what I mentioned in my comment on Slack, because this is what I'm really struggling with. If X exists in virtue of Y and X makes some proposition P true, then it would be by transitivity Y that makes the proposition true. So
Yeah.
then what is X above and beyond Y? It has to be X is something like constituted by Y and that relation, not just
Wait, can you say the whole thing again? I didn't understand what you wrote down either.
so there's some proposition about X, right? Let's just say X exists. If X is non-fundamental and X exists in virtue of Y, then X's existence is grounded in Y. But X is something distinct from Y. It exists in virtue of Y, but if in virtue of is a relation between X and Y, X must be something above and beyond just Y.
Yeah, but that's fine. That just means that grounding is transitive. So if the proposition "the rose is red" is made
No.
true,
Y cannot be in a relation with something that does not exist until it is in a relation with it, unless the in virtue of.
Can you put the
Y
whole
would
example
not.
again in terms of an actual proposition so that I don't get confused?
Well, let's just speak about the world. We don't have to bring propositions in anymore. So we're just speaking about grounding. So if X is grounded in Y, that is
Well,
X.
X is a variable.
exists.
Can we say, like, is X a proposition or an entity that
X is an
propositions are
entity.
about?
X is the non-fundamental entity.
Non-fundamental,
Water
like the
molecule.
rose, like the red rose.
Sure. Or an atom, or a molecule. Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever entity that X can refer to.
Okay.
It exists. It's non-fundamental, so its dependence exists on Y, which I'm stating is fundamental.
Okay, so the red
Oh, you
rose
mean if Y is-
exists in
okay.
virtue of various atoms.
Why? Yeah.
Mhm.
So the molecule exists in virtue of the atoms.
Yeah.
Okay. But there's something above and beyond y that gives existence to x. There's something about the relationship that is distinct from just y. Otherwise, y could not be in a relation with nothing, and in being in a relation with nothing brings about or metaphysically determines x.
What do you mean in relation with nothing? What are you talking about?
X is in a relation with y. It's in virtue of or metaphysical dependence grounding relation. It's a relation between entities.
Are you
Sorry,
saying
what?
that if X is ontologically dependent on Y, then
Mhm.
X must be both distinct from Y and also be and also there must be that there both must be nothing above and beyond Y to X and yet be distinct from Y. Is that what you're saying?
More specifically, it can't be y's relation with x
Of
that
course not.
determines x.
No, it's just Y that determines X, period.
There's a relation between x and y. Otherwise,
It is
y
the
and x are
determination
identical.
relation. It is the grounding relation.
Right. So it can't be the determination relation if y just is that brings about x. If
Right.
it's a relation, and it's a non-causal, it's a synchronic relation that determines x. X is determined by y. It's a relation. So there are relata, there are entities, x and y.
The problem here is that we're using determination to relate entities, but I'm not sure that I would do that. I take determination to be a relation between propositions.
Wait, grounding is supposed to be a relationship between entities most of the time.
Yes, exactly.
It's just in the
Yes.
truth-making case that propositions even get into the,
Exactly.
Right. No, I'm with you there.
and it's
That's why I
supposed
prefer to
to
talk about grounding,
capture
not
dependence.
determination. Yes, I'm with you there as well. But we're introducing determination now.
Well, it's constitutive determination. It's metaphysical
Constitutive.
determination.
Are we using
I
all
thought
of
that's
these
what grounding was
synonymously? Is
supposed
that-
to be.
That's
No, I'm
literally
fine with
what grounding
The problem is
is.
with determination. I'm fine with grounding. The problem is with determination.
Why is that a problem? I mean, that's a
Because
notion.
you're, okay, I guess I'm confused now. But I thought the problem that you were presenting was something about determination posing a problem for grounding. Did I mishear that?
I'm not sure why determination is a problem. Would you prefer constitution?
Yes,
better?
actually. Yes.
Okay. So if x exists in virtue of y,
Right.
and the nature of this grounding relation is one of constitution,
Right.
then if there is nothing above and beyond y that constitute x, then as far as I can tell, x is identical with y.
I see.
And since this metaphysical relation is
Yeah.
a relation, there are
Yeah, this is
relata.
yes, this is the identity problem that Hornsby was bringing up.
Yes. So it must be that the relation is something above and beyond y. But how is
wait,
y in a
is it-
relationship?
Oh, wait. Why is not a relation? Why is
Against
the
the y.
entity that is related to X?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So what is the problem? Like maybe X really is.
If it is the relationship that constitutes, at least partially, x, how does that relationship somehow constitute x if x must be a relata in order for there to be that relation between it and y?
Well, why should the relation have anything to do with constituting X? I mean, I guess
Why isn't the
that's
relation just the
that's-
relation of
that's-
constitution?
maybe this is the issue of the
Because it is the
internal
relation of constitution.
relations.
It is the relation of constitution. What's wrong with that?
But its existence
Because
depends on the Constitution, and the Constitution depends on the existence.
No, the relation, the existence of X does not depend on the constitution relation. It depends on Y. It depends on the existence of Y, period. And that dependence is called the constitution grounding relation. It isn't that the existence of X depends on the relation between X and Y. It is that it depends on Y, and that dependence is called the grounding constitutional relation.
But that dependence must be something distinct from Y. You've already said that yourself. And so if there's something
Of
distinct from
course,
Y,
the dependence is distinct from Y because the dependence is the relation and Y is what is related.
but if a relation has relata, I guess I can't say this any clearer. If there's Y and Y in some way determines X,
Well, no. Well, I mean, look, this is
non-positive,
part of
Determination.
constitutionally.
this is part of why it's not constitutive dependence is not the same thing as determination.
Right. Yeah, we dropped determination. Remember? I mean, I'm fine.
Right. I mean, remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, the molecules may depend on the atoms, but the atoms could exist without the molecule existing.
Well, that's the claim. Yes, yes.
That's the asymmetry.
But this,
No, but
it's not the case that molecules
what-
are constituted of atoms, and that completely accounts for the molecules. That's just not the case. There is the relation between the atoms.
right.
that
right.
counts
That
for
too, of
molecules.
course. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But that's not the relations between the atoms
but-
and the molecules. That's the relation between the atoms.
But the constitutive dependence isn't the same thing as a determination.
Okay, fine. Drop dependence. I think the problem still remains. The relationship must be distinct from the entities that are in
Yeah.
this constitutive relation.
Okay.
There's two relations here. The
Right.
relation between the molecule and the atoms. And then there's the relations between the atoms that, in part, together with the atoms, constitute the molecule.
Yes.
So the covalent
Mhm.
bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen is not the constitutional relation between water and hydrogen and oxygen. Covalent bonds are not grounding relations.
Covalent bonds are not grounding relations. They would have to be part of the grounding relation.
They'd be part of.
They'd
No,
be
no,
part
no.
of.
They are what is related to the molecule by the grounding relation.
They are what is related to the ground. Wait, what? Say that again.
They're
Yeah,
separate from
yeah.
the molecule?
They're separate from. I don't.
I mean, I haven't talked about separations, so I'm not saying anything about anything being separate. What I'm saying is that the first hydrogen atom, the second
Not
hydrogen
identical.
atom, the first hydrogen atom, the second hydrogen atom, and the one oxygen atom, and the first covalent bond and the second covalent bond, all of those together constitute the molecule of H2O.
Then the molecule of H2O does not exist in virtue of the atoms, but in virtue of the atoms and their bonds.
Yes, but the bonds are not constitution relations. They're covalent bonds.
What? How are they not? So it's a different type of relation?
Right. It's a chemical relation, not a grounding relation.
Why? What do you mean?
Because it's not a relation between the two levels of reality, right? The molecules on one level, atoms and covalent bonds are on another level. The relation that connects the two levels is not the same as the relation between atoms on the same level.
How is that not just a flat out rejection of the grounding relation? Then
Because I'm
there are
telling you
no
what the grounding relation
molecules.
is. I'm affirming it. I'm not rejecting it.
Well, then there are no molecules. There are only atoms and bonds, right?
No, there are both atoms,
Huh?
bonds, and molecules
In virtue of what other molecules?
in virtue of the atoms and the chemical bonds between them.
But that's a different level.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm not sure how I'm not sure how scientific eliminativism doesn't follow from that. I'm not sure how there are
Because
molecules.
I'm not saying the molecule doesn't exist. If I did say the molecule didn't exist, then I would be an eliminativist.
Well, you haven't said in virtue of what they do exist.
Yes, I have. They exist in virtue of the atoms and the bonds between the atoms.
Then
just
they're
not the
identical
bonds.
with the atoms and the bonds.
Why does that follow, I guess, is the
No, I don't
question.
think they are, because there are 5 entities. Okay, there's the 3 atoms and the 2 bonds. 5 does not equal 1. Therefore, the molecule which is 1 and the constitutive entities which are 5 are not identical.
No, in virtue of what are the parts a distinct whole called the molecule? That
Well,
we
no,
denote with.
the whole is the molecule. The whole, which are those parts together, is not distinct from the molecule. That is the molecule. The whole is constituted by the parts. Altogether.
So then it wouldn't be that X exists in virtue of Y, but exists in virtue of X and Y and some bond between X and Y.
No. X exists in virtue of Y1 through Y5, because there are 5 constituents: 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom, and 2 covalent bonds.
I guess I'm not seeing how the molecule exists. I'm not sure how you're getting this extra level, as you call it, from this lower level of atoms and bonds. I'm not sure how that follows.
I'm not really sure what you mean by getting. I'm just calling it what it is. I'm not conjuring it into existence. It just is a molecule.
Well, I'm not sure how you get from a reductive account of atoms and bonds to molecules. You're
I'm
taking
not
all
sure
the
what you
parts
mean
as
by-
a whole. I'm saying in virtue of what is a whole,
Yeah,
a whole.
I don't understand the question. What do you mean by getting to? I mean, what kind of travel is this? Like, there are both atoms and covalent bonds and a molecule. I mean, they're all there.
Well, just that. I'm asking what explanatory work the grounding relation is doing if a molecule just is the parts and the bonds between
Right.
the parts.
What the explanatory work it's doing is explaining in virtue of what fundamental reality, the non-fundamental reality of the molecule exists. That is the work that it is doing.
But I guess if a molecule is identical with the parts and the bonds, it's not clear to me that it has distinct
It's
existence.
not identical because it is 1 and the parts are 5.
Yeah, but in virtue of what are the 5 1? I mean, that's the grounding problem.
They aren't.
They
The
are.
5 are not 1. The 5
Okay.
constitute the 1. They ground the 1. I'm not confusing grounding with identity.
I guess, but what you are claiming that there's an entity there, right? That it,
Of course,
that,
yeah.
But you might think that, and as Hornsby says, entities come very cheaply. So let's say that there's there's you're basically saying there's 5, there's 6 entities, just one's at a different level.
That's right.
Right. So, but you would have to, it seems like you have to have some account of why you posit this other level.
Well,
Is that, so
because-
let's say that there's these hydrogen and oxygens in the bonds, or there's 5 things, and then there's a random atom of neon or something,
Okay.
lead or something just in the vicinity. Is there an entity that's those things plus that?
Right.
No.
Okay, so why, but you could just go up a level and say there's one
Yeah.
entity, and it's not the same as those things plus that as a set, because it's not 6, it's
Mhm.
1, and it's
Right.
this water lead thing.
Right.
So why is there not water lead at the other?
Well, because there's nothing. I mean, there can be. I mean, we can posit such an entity, and it wouldn't be meaningless, but we don't do so because there's no science of water leads. There's a science of water, or more objectually, there are truths about water, nomological truths about water.
So I think that's going to be probably the answer is that you get the entities at the various levels through laws that operate at those levels, and then you can do programs of reduction or discovering
I think-
metaphysical dependencies, but you have
I
some
don't-
other story
No. I don't want
about
to say
why
that
you have some story about why there's one thing there. Like, so why not say that there's actually let's just get at the atom. Instead of there being one molecule of water, there's there's a marriage between an oxygen and hydrogen one level up. It's a marriage, like, I mean, it's
I don't know what that means.
there's not a one thing, but there's a two thing in a relationship one level up.
You mean pairs
So
of
there's down here,
molecules?
there's 5. Down here, so there's the 5, there's the 3 atoms and the two covalent bonds. And up from there, you get a 2.
Yeah.
You get 2 entities in a relationship.
A 2 and a 3.
Or a
Two.
3, right? A 3. You go from 5 to 3.
Oh,
You get
A threesome
you
marriage.
get the 2, yeah, you get the
Haven't-
2
haven't
you
we
get
just-
you get
yes.
the you get the
Yes.
2 oxygen in their bond, which is
Sure.
one entity, and then you get the hydrogen atom, and it's another entity, and then you get
Right.
the bond between those or whatever.
Right. Well, isn't that just what we call
And so
molecules?
you go up and then
Why
that's-
are we renaming molecules marriages? Yeah, it's a molecule. I mean, look, I misspoke when I said
No,
that
because
you
I don't think that the molecule is. I mean, I think I think you were suggesting that the molecule is where there's one thing, one layer up, and I'm saying there's 2 things in a relationship.
Well, I'm not saying that marriages
Laying
don't
up.
involve multiple people, but a marriage is one. One marriage is one marriage, even if 2 people are married.
At the upper level.
Well, that's the only level at which there is a marriage.
No, because there can be the level of there's 2 people in a relationship.
That's not where the marriage is. No, the relationship is at one level. The 2 people is at.
No, the
I mean, look,
relationship might be a level. I mean, it might be an entity like the bond, the covalent bond. But
That's
you
not-
you didn't say that, look, there's the oxygen and there's the oxygen and the covalent bond is up a level. And there's only one of those. So that's
I
where
mean,
you're going
perhaps
up.
it is. Perhaps it is. Perhaps there are 3 levels. I just hadn't thought about it. But I only meant to distinguish between molecules and atoms. But it might be that you have 3 levels: atoms, bonds between atoms, and then molecules at 3 levels. But I haven't had an opportunity to justify why I would say that there is the water molecule, but not the water lead entity, which wouldn't be a molecule because there's no bond between the lead and the water. I answered that there wouldn't be such an entity, but I think I spoke too soon. There could be such an entity, or rather there is such an entity if we posit it and if we choose to speak that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing so. It just serves no purpose. The reason we speak of certain entities is in service of the truths that we come to know that make reference to them. And
Oh, so yeah,
and
so
we-
maybe-
and they may not be true. We might just have beliefs that are false, and then that would lead us to posit entities that might still be grounded without actually figuring in any true theories. So I don't want to relativize the existence of entities to truth or laws. I only said that because I was reflexively reciting Quinian criteria for ontology, but I want to speak more broadly, actually, to be more aligned with the truthmaker ontology, which is competitive with the Quinian picture, right? I want to be, I want to admit anything which observes a proper grounding relation, which is nothing other than the identification of wholes and not identification, sorry, the relating of wholes to their constitutive parts. So
right,
there's nothing to it other
where
than
where
just
it's where
knowing
that's just
what's-
a matter of going down or up a level, right, rather than any other stronger relationship than
Yeah,
that.
where levels are distinguished from one another in virtue of the priority of the grounding, the priority and transitivity and irreflexivity reflexivity of the grounding relation, right? That's how you know two things are at different levels, because the entities of one level ground the entities at a higher level, but don't ground entities at that same level because it's irreflexive. The eliminativist, actually, I've developed a bit of a sympathy for the eliminativist after thinking about these issues in relation to Kit Fine's paper, because we might want to say that only a fundamental reality exists if we are careful to say that derivative reality still exists in virtue of being identical with some fundamental reality, or rather some plurality of fundamental reality. I just don't prefer that language because I want to make a distinction by way of number. So if one entity is constituted by a plurality of entities, I don't see any virtue in appealing to the identity relation there, since pluralities are not identical to unities on pain of contradiction of number, like 1 is not equal to 5. But I'm sympathetic.
But you're also
to-
saying 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is not equal to 5, right? Because there's 5 on one side and there's just 1 on the other.
Well, what we have there is an equality of quantity, not an equality of identity. And the plus is not an enumeration. So 1 + 1 does equal 2, but that's because it's not the same thing as saying 1, 1 equals 2. The mereology relation would be 1, 1, not 1 + 1. Sum, when we speak of the sum of the parts, should not be confused with addition in the arithmetic sense.
1, 1 isn't 2? Aren't there 2 ones?
1, 1 is just 1, 1.
So why isn't a molecule just a plurality? How does it even?
Because it's a unity, it's one thing.
In virtue of what? I'm not
In
seeing how
virtue
you're
of the plurality.
I'm not seeing how this 5 plus
That's a bit-
level equals 1 thing.
But 1, 1 isn't
I'm
2
not
in
sure
virtue
what
of
the
the
roadblock
plurality.
is. I'm not sure what the roadblock is. I'm not contradicting myself, I don't think. And I am finding a way to relate molecules to atoms. So I think those two speak for the virtues of what I'm saying.
Well, I'm sincerely not catching this because your way of relating them seems to just be stipulating a distinct level. I'm not
stipulating the level.
So there's a plurality, and then there's something like an additional level and a unity. And I'm asking
But I'm not
how.
stipulating it. I'm
Okay.
recognizing that molecules do not have independent, or rather don't have reality independent of their constituent parts, of their grounds.
That's fine, but I'm just wondering how on your account they even have existence.
Because they exist. I don't even know how that question makes sense. Of course molecules exist.
I mean, isn't that just like
are
Hornsby saying, of course, properties are instantiated? Like, what else is there to
Well,
say?
perhaps, but I don't take there to be a wide, a wide range of philosophers denying the existence of molecules. Do you?
Yes, this is reductive. This is
The
eliminative.
eliminative.
This is a major position.
Yes, well, I mean it is, but it's not a widely held position. It's kind of mocked, to be honest. And besides, even they admit that molecules have a derivative reality. They just want to deny that it has a fundamental reality. And frankly,
Regardless if it's mocked or not, I'm not seeing how this grounding relation is explaining the existence of a molecule.
I mean, maybe you're
I'm not denying the
asking-
existence. I'm just saying your
Right.
position doesn't seem to present an
Right.
explanation.
Right. Maybe you're asking more from the explanation than it pretends to supply.
No. I mean, everybody agrees that grounding as a consequence is explanatory. And what
I
I'm
agree
saying
with
is
that too. I agree with
this
that too.
grounding as a
But-
relation seems to explain nothing.
Well, look, I agree that it's explanatory, but I'm not sure that what you think explanations provide is what I think explanations provide.
In virtue of what the plurality is a unity. That's what's missing. In virtue of what? Why is it not the case that there are just
I don't
atoms and
understand.
bonds,
I think his
particles and
answer
I don't
is-
understand,
I
I don't
think
understand how
his-
you can
I
ask me
think-
about
I think his
in-virtue
answer-
relations denying grounding relations when it's exactly the same thing. In-virtue
think his answer
relations
is-
are the grounding relation.
I think his answer was any possible plurality is a unity. You can go up a
Yes.
level on anything. So
Yes.
so it's not hard to do. You just,
Yeah, but then
because
what is
it's
the
not,
nature of this?
because,
What is the nature of this going
because
up?
you can just say, I'm giving it a name, and it's a single name, and one is not 7,
So
one
it's
is
an
not
epistemic
12,
notion,
one is
grounding an
not
epistemic
8.
notion.
No, it's not just
So it's a
the
unity.
part whole. It's not just the part whole relation. It's that together with the counterfactual dependence. It's not just that the molecule depends on its parts. It's that it would not be a molecule without those parts. So it's the two conditions. And I think that's all there's to it. I don't think you need anything more. And as for whether that is sufficiently explanatory, I mean, you leave me wondering what it is that you think explanations are, and what it is that what more there is to explain than what has been said so far. So to me, this becomes a question not so much about grounding or about reality or about levels of reality, but about explanation. What the hell do you think explanation is supposed to do?
Explain.
Yes, well, we agree on that.
It's
Okay.
it sounds like to say that a plurality is one is relative to some concern is just to introduce
Don't say
epistemology.
pluralities are one. That would be to identify grounding with identity, which I've denied.
I mean, what are levels apart from description? I don't know what a level is. What's a
I'm not
metaphysical
talking
level?
about descriptions at all, actually.
Right. So what is it? What is a level in reality? What is a level?
A level is a domain of reality distinguished from other levels by the grounding relation.
What's a domain?
A domain is just like model theoretic set. So water molecules and sulfur dioxide molecules are at the same are in the same domain, in the sense that they don't ground each other, and they're both grounded by some elements of some other common domain, namely the domain at which you find oxygen atoms.
Sets are
Is any of this
abstract,
making sense to anybody?
sets are abstract entities, but I'm guessing levels are causally efficacious, right? So I guess I'm not seeing how.
No, levels themselves are not causally efficacious, but the entities at those levels, of course, if
At
they are
those
causal at
levels?
all, are causally. I mean, numbers are not causally efficacious, so I don't want to speak too broadly, but yes, molecules are causally efficacious, obviously.
Kenny, can you say something insightful, please?
um,
So far, this sounds like utter madness,
on the topic, Kenny, on the topic.
this just sounds like academic madness, where one is content with a position in virtue of it just having been argued for everywhere, and it's just not conceptually coherent as far as I can tell. It's just I understand.
I
I'm
mean,
not
charges of
unfamiliar.
incoherence need to identify the contradiction. I don't know that you've done that.
I don't know if coherence necessarily means a lack of contradiction, does it?
Well, it's a good start.
Could just be a lack of continuity or connection, or
You don't think there's a continuity between molecules and atoms? And
no, I
grounding?
do think there is, but I don't think it's explicated so far in this position. Like in
Well,
virtue
no,
of
that's fine. We've understood that you think there's more to be explained. I just don't know what you think there is to be explained beyond what has been said. Like, I think we just disagree, not so much about grounding and reality and levels and atoms and molecules and parts and wholes. I think we disagree about explanation.
Well, no, I don't think that not enough has been said. I think nothing has been said about what, let's say, constitutes the levels.
Well, even
or-
so, even if you thought nothing had been said, you would still be asking for more to be said, and I'm not sure what that would be.
Yeah,
well, I mean, I guess that, the most obvious thing to say, right, is just all of the things that exist that we say exist at that level, right? That just is what constitutes the level.
Yes.
Well, what individuates the levels? The claims?
The grounding
No, the
relations.
grounding relations. Yeah. Jinx.
Actually, singular. The grounding relation.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
in this case, right? I mean,
So
yeah.
the levels exist in virtue of the grounding relationship, which itself is a grounding relationship?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
What's yeah, I mean,
It's just grounding.
there's an ordering that's generated by the grounding
It's
relation,
grounding
right?
all the way down to the ground, which is why we call it that.
I I mean, there's an ordering defined by the grounding relation, right? I mean,
Right.
and it's just
The only thing
those
that
those are
doesn't
just
exist
the levels.
the only thing that doesn't exist in virtue of some grounding relation is the fundamental ground, which is why we call it what's fundamental.
Right. So now you're your notion of grounding depends on the fundamental then,
No,
which I
not
thought was
really,
Yeah.
something.
because you can have
Is this
relative
ground
fundamental.
zero?
Yeah, exactly. But no, it doesn't depend on that, because what it does depend on is it's the other way around. It's like fundamentality depends on grounding, but you only need relative fundamentality, or which is just the same thing as grounding.
So something is fundamental because it's not grounded. Something is grounded because it's not fundamental. They're different levels because they're grounded. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got it. So what are you
Yeah,
complaining about? You understand it perfectly.
Said something. Something
Look,
has
I mean,
been said.
the reason we talk this way, maybe that's what you're asking for. Like, why do we even talk this way? The reason we talk this way is so that we can substantiate the claim that fundamental reality is, in some sense, all that there is. Of course, we don't want to say that there are no chairs, even though the standard model tells us that everything comes down to these 17 particles. And the way we substantiate that is to say that everything else is grounded in those 17 particles.
Yeah.
That's why we talk this way. Of course, if one has no concern for issues of fundamentality, then yeah, there's no point in talking this way.
Cost is too high.
Well, that's what opponents of fundamentality say. But
Yeah.
let's not confuse that with incoherence. That's just a disagreement about the utility of talking about grounding.
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure enough has been said so that there is continuity that could even be debated. There seems to be this discontinuity. There's a bunch of stipulations and no clear connection other than this notion of grounding, which seems to be dependent on other notions, which themselves seem to be dependent on the notion of grounding. And so I'm not sure much has been said other than there's this thing, it's called grounding, and it allows us to say
Allows
the
you to
thing
keep your
that-
chair.
It allows you to keep your chair. But has it explained anything, which is supposed to be a consequence?
Yeah, no,
No.
I hear what you're saying, but there's really no answer to give until we hear more about what you think explanations are and what would actually qualify as a satisfying explanation in general. Because it is in reference, it is in response to calls for explanation that any of this language is employed. So
Well, I
this
mean,
is
we can-
arbitrary. It isn't arbitrary stipulation. There may be elements of stipulation, although I didn't do that. That's kind of baked into the language and has been for more than a century. But because it was the Germans who started talking about ground, actually, not us. So I didn't stipulate anything.
Well, let me
I'm
stop you.
just-
So I'm not asking for something more explanatory, just I'm asking for something. So why
Yeah,
is
no,
it
fair
that,
enough. Fair enough.
why is it that there are 2 levels instead of 18 levels?
Because not everything is
between
fundamental.
atoms and
That's why.
molecules?
That's the
Because
reason.
why?
Because not everything is fundamental. That's why.
Oh,
Well,
well, hold on. No. But no, wait,
that's
wait, wait. No. That's a harder. No, Josh, that's a much harder question. Why is it that there's just, physics and chemistry and biology and psychology and sociology and not shmanology and, abology and like, why is it that things are divided in that many ways as opposed to so many other ways? That's a much harder and a different kind of question, I think, than just saying or making a distinction between levels at all in the first place, right? Like asking whether or not there is some necessity to how things, are divided up logically. It's not clear that that's the same. It's not clear that it's the same question or whether it's simply an empirical matter. Look and see how many,
that seems like
how much structure is there in the world.
That's a third question. My question is simply in virtue of what are there distinct levels, not which ones are they?
Well, we said in virtue of what though, right? The grounding
One isn't
relations
five.
and the things that are so grounded.
And
Right,
and
No,
the
I think
claim
that-
that not
I think
everything is
that-
fundamental.
Well,
And-
yeah, I
no,
suppose
and-
otherwise there's just one level,
Right.
right? Trivially.
If everything were fundamental, there would be only one level, and nothing would ground anything else.
There are grounding relationships in relation to
But you
virtue
see-
of levels and levels in
this is-
virtue of the grounding relate. This is
No,
No.
but
if nothing depends on anything else for its existence, then then nothing grounds anything else. So it's if you admit of ontological dependence,
Right.
okay, then that's what these relations explain. Perhaps the question is one I should be asking you. Do you admit that anything ontologically depends on anything else? Do you think that anything's existence depends on whether or not something else exists?
Yes, and I think that's indifferent to fundamentality.
Well, okay, maybe so. But that dependence, that's just what I call grounding.
That can't be, because that's also going to include diachronic dependence. It's going to include causation. Children depend on their parents for their existence, but that's not that has no ontological priority whatsoever. But there is dependence.
That's fine. So let me just add synchronic. Synchronic ontological dependence. Okay. By the way, let's just go ahead and add all the other conditions so we don't do this back and forth. Synchronic ontological dependence without reflexivity.
Yeah.
Okay. If you admit that that relation exists at all between any pair of entities, that's grounding.
I don't.
But perhaps you don't admit that. Perhaps you don't think
that
anything synchronically depends on anything else. By the way, this business of time, I think, has a dialectical purpose because we have centuries of talk of causation and maybe just a decade or two of talk of grounding in so self-conscious a way. So I think it makes sense dialectically to separate them, but I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that diachronic causation is just another instance of grounding.
It can't
So
be. I mean, it can't.
I just said I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not prepared to argue for it.
Okay.
I'd rather just focus on the synchronic particular variety. And
Keep in mind, what I'm against is not metaphysical dependence of any kind. It's that it is synchronic. I think it can't be synchronic.
Oh, you don't think that there is synchronic ontological dependence?
No.
So you think there can be molecules without atoms?
Nope, that doesn't follow from that. I think molecules are dependent on the parts and their causal properties, or properties individuated by their causal powers. So it's
atoms are their parts.
Atoms are their parts plus the bonds, and I think bonds.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean atoms alone would do it, but do they at least depend on atoms?
At a time, no. Synchronically, no. Diachronically, yes.
Yeah, no, I meant at a time. So an H2O molecule at a given time, you don't think depends for its existence at that time on the oxygen atom within. That is, on its existence.
Depends. I think for the
take the water away, you destroy that oxygen atom too.
Yes, but that's not the question. The question is, if you take the oxygen away, do you still have the water molecule?
Does another oxygen atom sneak in there? Maybe then.
Well, before you manage to put it in, do you still have a water molecule?
Is this a ship of Theseus?
Yeah.
I mean, that's look. The question is
we don't want to get the historical in there. I think one of the problems is that it's really when we ask
placement is diachronic.
But so is the answer to the question: can you have oxygen atoms without hydrogen atoms? That's from looking at the history and saying, oh, there have been oxygen atoms. I don't know that, if we're just talking synchronic, we're talking like a slice of the universe at a particular time. Could you have that oxygen atom without that water molecule? No, you could not.
Yeah, I think you can have an oxygen atom without a water molecule.
You could have a different oxygen atom that's not part of that water molecule synchronically.
Sure. Oh, well.
But that one?
No, you could have that.
No.
Of course
you take the water. If you take the water molecule out of the universe, you're taking that oxygen too.
No, not at all, because you can take the water molecule out by removing one of the hydrogens.
That's not the water molecule. The water molecule's parts, we were enumerated. There were 5 of them. You got to take all 5 out to take the water molecule out of the universe.
That's not true. That doesn't follow at all.
Sure it does. You just told me that the water molecule at that level has 5 parts. So when you take the water molecule out, you got to take out those 5 parts. So that oxygen atom is gone.
I think we're sneaking in
synchronically.
Yeah. To take out, okay, is not really in the discourse of grounding. So really what you need to do is...
Well, it is. It's putting in all God had to create was, right?
Okay.
The divine test is the fundamental test, apparently, of grounding.
And all God needs to
All
do,
God had to do,
and,
right?
and all God needs to do for the water molecule to cease to exist is to remove any of its parts. So by that test,
No,
you don't
then
need
it
to remove
just,
all the
it
parts.
exists with a, it exists as a, 2/3 of its former self.
Yeah, that doesn't really work with water.
But if the water isn't the
Well-
parts, then it does.
Yeah, no,
I mean, we can't call it, maybe we wouldn't be tempted to call it water anymore, but that
I'm not
water
sure
molecule is
temptation
still there. It's
matters
just in
here. I think-
2/3.
I mean, if there's a
its former
contradiction
glory.
in what I'm saying, it's
Yeah.
good to hear it, but otherwise this is not
I mean, like,
really
if
faithful
you,
to the claims that I made. It's just changing
if I
them
take your
around.
hand away, right, you're still there. You're handless.
Well, that's because my hand is not an essential constituent. That
So
doesn't
now there's
work
some
that way.
concept of essence going on here. I think that's making water, and that seems more than just this. Look, there's, you get an entity because it's one rather than five, and you can do it with anything.
Yeah, that's why I said it
Thereby
isn't
let it
merely- that's
atoms and
absolutely right.
right.
That's why I
So,
said
but I think as
that's why I
soon
said it's
as you,
neurology
as soon
plus
as you,
counterfactual dependence,
right.
which is where you get.
I
the
think
essence.
if you, as soon as you get in essences, you're becoming a middleist.
Well,
I think
mean, it's a fun joke.
yeah,
but it's
maybe
not
there
true.
might, there's going to be, there's going to be fundamentals
Right.
created by
Well,
those
you'll be
essences,
mental,
so that
that's for
all
sure.
God need,
If
all
you
God
listen to
need,
this
all
for
God
much
needs
longer.
to do
Yeah.
is put in those essences, and you'll
And you'll
get all
have
the parts
fun,
of
too.
the essences.
So
Yeah,
what are
you'll have all the parts of the essences come
Right.
for free.
what are we reading next week?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, what I'm realizing here is we'll never do a track on grounding because there's no motivation for it. But for next week, we'll just do David Lewis's take on all of this.
What have we been
And-
doing?
Okay.
Well,
Hmm?
remember that was his.
We read like 5 papers on ground.
That was the one we read was his community outreach paper. Whereas the one that follows is his position. And
Wait,
then that's it.
truth making.
About truth making. That's right.
Yeah, Lewis's paper about truth making. Yeah.
Yeah, which we didn't read. So that's it. That's all I got. I can't think of anything else to read on truth making. I mean, of course, there's plenty more, but
I mean, I think that's good for now.
yeah.
I thought
And
we
then
read
after that-
Lewis's paper on truth making in the anthology.
No, in the
We read
anthology,
a
but there's a
paper. We
different
read-
one.
Yeah, we read
Oh,
a paper by
okay.
Lewis about truth making, but not where he lays out his position on truth making.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Um,
Well, he just argued that truth making can't work.
Well,
No, what he
if
said is that
if
it
you're
can't- What he said is
can't
that
work
it can't
without
work if you
his
don't
modal
accept
realism.
his modal realism. Yeah.
right,
But I thought he says
that
you
was
don't-
the paper we read.
Yeah, but he said you don't need truth making if you accept his account of modal realism, right?
Well, you don't need truth
I
making
don't
as
think
he
so.
describes,
Yeah,
the
right.
positions that other people have, but
Maybe I'll take it if it means that hydrogen atom gets to survive the loss of that oxygen one. Because in Impossible Worlds, it's got all kinds of things. In Impossible Worlds, that water molecule is made up of silly putty and glue.
it's silly. I'll give you that. Oh my god. I think the most hostile position to truth making has got to be pluralism, scientific pluralism, because they want to deny that physics is even a fundamental science.
Well, I mean, why should that have to be hostile to truth making? I mean, I don't even know.
Not to
that.
truth making, to grounding.
Oh.
Did I say truth making?
Yeah.
Not grounding.
Yeah. So, I say yeah.
Goodness, they're middleists.
I'm sure they are.
Like they're happy.
They might be. I don't know. Yeah.
They're happy to have grounding go.
Well,
both
I
ways.
mean, they're not middleists because they don't privilege any particular science. That's the whole point.
Right. So they're
of
multi.
pluralism. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no
Mm.
foundation.
I mean, I've even heard them say,
You mean like the
Hey.
Stanford pluralists or whatever?
Well,
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So
No,
not
but I mean,
middleists,
yeah. I just point that out because I feel like there are other pluralists that aren't really Stanford pluralists.
Oh, I'm pluralist about pluralists. I mean, the point is, if you don't
Yeah.
seek to relate different areas of science to one another in a hierarchy of some kind, then grounding is pointless.
Well,
I mean, of course,
that may be true, but
it's
that
not
may be
entirely
true, yeah.
pointless if you have ideas about metaphysics that have nothing to do with the philosophy of science. But to the extent that the philosophy of
Right.
science is a kind of shadow of metaphysics more broadly, then
Sure,
if you're a
yeah.
pluralist there, you're likely a pluralist all around.
Right. Well, what I mean is that sometimes it's meant as in contrast to reduction, right? I mean,
Of
you know,
course.
there are people who are not reductionists and in that sense
Of
pluralists,
course.
but still think that grounding is a thing.
Yes, right. There's middle positions there, you know, like motivated by like supervenience as a halfway house.
Yeah.
Reductionism. Yeah, but I think Josh's reluctance to see value in this is probably related to your skepticism about fundamentality as well. You had expressed an anti-fundamentalism recently.
Well, no, my skepticism, for calling it that, is grounded in my desire to
Yeah.
make mid-sized objects first-class fundamental citizens. Like,
Yeah,
I think,
unfortunately, I don't know what you mean by grounding anymore because you don't think there's any such thing. So I'm just going to strike your comment as meaningless.
Because remember, there are possible worlds where the mid-sized objects aren't made up of atoms at all. Surely, right?
Yeah.
They're just like made up of chair all the way down.